Imagine plunging deep into the depths of a dungeon only to uncover treasures that lay beneath the stronghold. But when faced by a mighty red dragon, the party's healer is forced to cast a escape spell. But it seems everyone had escaped except for her. Now venturing back through the dungeon, you're forced to hunt monsters for food. But along the way, you uncover some mysteries you've never realized about the dungeon. The series opens near a village that notices a rift appearing from beneath the ground, uncovering an old man who claims to be the king of a former kingdom. The old man utters that his kingdom had been held captive by an evil magician, offering to hand over the kingdom to whoever defeats said magician, suddenly vanishing into dust. Moving forward in time, we follow several adventurers pitted against a mighty dragon, all working together to pick away at the dragon. But the adventurers begin dropping one by one, having lost valuable time and resources in the previous days. Laos Tudin, the leader and our MC, is seen lost in thought, planning their next course of action after defeating the dragon. But suddenly Fallon, Laos's younger sister, shoves Laos away, helplessly watching as Fallon is snatched up by the red dragon. Scanning the area, Laos realizes his party has completely been wiped, watching as Fallon casts one final spell out of desperation, sending Laos and the entirety of the party back to the surface. Waking up in a field, Laos is called by Marcel Donato, notified that everyone had escaped the dungeon, all but Fallon herself. Laos is horrified to realize that her magic couldn't rescue her from the jaws of the dragon, asking for everyone to prepare to re-enter the dungeon. But Marcel reveals that everyone's gear had been lost when they were transported out of the dungeon. Chilchuk also joins the conversation, revealing that two of their party members have resigned, having been scouted by other parties. Laos knows exploring dungeons costs money to hire companions, buying equipment, and purchasing food, wondering if they could sell their current items to cover their expenses, but Chilchuk says they're nowhere near their goal. Laos knows that Fallon will get digested the longer they wait, saddened to hear revival spells won't work in every case, but first they should refuel with some food. Heading through town, Marcel and Chilchuk both begin listing off foods they crave, but Laos reminds them that they still need to save Fallon, suggesting that he solo the dungeon whilst the others sell their gear. Laos blames himself for not being more prepared, not wanting to put his friends in harm's way. But Marcel reminds Laos he needs her magic, and Chilchuk states they'll need his skills to open doors and disable traps. With Laos fired up, he declares that they'll quench their hunger by slaying the monsters within the dungeon, reminding everyone that there is an entire ecosystem of monsters in the dungeon, and this will surely give them chances to hunt for their own meals. As Marcel and Chilchuk think back on their monster encounters, they question if they'll survive after eating such creatures, telling Laos that criminals that have been banished are the ones that feed on monsters. But as Laos and Marcel continue to bicker, they suddenly spot a newbie party fleeing from a monster. With a single swing, Marcel knocks out the mushroom monster chasing them, watching as Laos appoint the mushroom monster as their first meal, learning from a book that mushrooms are a good beginner meal. Needing more ingredients, Laos rushes deeper into the dungeon, cutting over to a section of the dungeon that once was a cemetery for villagers to sleep, but now it has been turned into a marketplace for adventurers. Apparently, it was only 6 years ago when the dungeon emerged, and no one has any idea how it came to be, with people believing it to be forbidden magic that created the dungeon or monsters from another world flooding into their current one. Spotting a hole in the dungeon, Laos sticks his wrapped-up sword into the hole, luring out a scorpion only to put it down like a crayfish. Chilchuk calls out Laos for secretly wanting to eat monsters, but Laos adds he was always fascinated by how monsters looked and how they function, but it doesn't detract from his mission to save his sister. Retrieving some water from a nearby fountain, the gang set up in the middle of the room, prompting Laos to cut into the mushroom monster, amazed to learn that cutting the creature from the side is tougher than vertical cuts. Dicing up the mushroom, Laos tosses the mushroom cubes along with the scorpion into a boiling pot, reassuring Marcel that the scorpion's venom is safe to consume. Tasting the meal, Laos immediately throws up, spotting Senshi calling out to them. Taking over, Senshi begins dissecting the scorpion, removing its pincer, head and legs only to extract the scorpion's organs. As for the mushroom, Senshi removes the bottom half of the mushroom, keeping its top and legs, only to toss everything into a bigger pot he prepared himself. Seeing as the meal is missing things, Senshi heads over to sever some roots and herbs. But Marcel is very opposed to eating plants grown from a location that once belonged to a cemetery. With Marcel demanding to know who Senshi is, a strange ooze pours onto Marcel, revealed to be a slime that restricts Marcel from casting her spells with her voice. Luckily, Senshi frees Marcel with a single stab to the slime, surprising Leos as it would normally take them longer. Senshi reveals the structure of a slime is quite simplistic, as slimes choose their targets based on the prey's breathing pattern, meaning shouting would naturally draw its attention. Senshi begins prepping the slime with some citric juice, sandwiching it between a net, and declaring he'll let it dry into a delicacy in the coming weeks. Taking out one he prepared earlier, Senshi mentions how he studied the dungeon for over 10 years, tasting and adding the final touches to his delicious hot pot. As Senshi serves the boys a bowl, Marcel patiently watches the boys enjoying the dish, giving in as she demands to taste the dish as well. Surprisingly, the slime combined with the roots and herbs Senshi added completes the meal, all dusting off their bowls as Senshi introduces himself as a dwarf researcher. Upon hearing that Leos and his party are heading deep into the dungeon to rescue his sister from a red dragon, Senshi laments that dragons normally spend their days sleeping and slowly digesting their food, excitedly asking if he can join Leos's party, having always wanted to cook up a red dragon. Although the gang are surprised by Senshi's enthusiasm, they accept Senshi as a member, all leaving the first basement floor only to head into the second basement floor filled with massive trees and greenery. Apparently, scholars believe that the second basement floor belongs to the upper region of a golden castle, making Chilchik question how the massive trees remain underground, but Leos brushes it off as another feature of the cursed dungeon. Seeing Marcel trip, Leos reasons they should set up camp and rest for the day, reminded of the time when they spent the night in a hollow tree, all agreeing to hunt down monsters for their dinner. Seeing Marcel annoyed, Leos promises to make a meal that suits her taste, but Marcel freaks out hearing that only rats, bats, goblins, and living armor are the most popular monsters nearby. Luckily, Senshi reassures everyone that fruits also grow nearby, guiding everyone to some man-eating plants with fruits growing from them, annoying Marcel. Leos reminds Marcel that man-eating plants are an umbrella term, showing off the Baracelia flower lure in a mouse with its mucus trap, slaying it only to use it as compost. Leos states that all plants and vegetables are grown from dead remains and animal feces, reassured by Chilchuk that such man-eating plants at their level would never be able to harm humans. Seeing as it'll be hard for the gang to sneak in and retrieve the fruits growing off the man-eating plants, Marcel begins channeling a spell, preparing to fire it at the man-eating plants, but is suddenly halted by Senshi. At that moment, the plant opens its petals, sending several vines to ensnare Marcel, only for Senshi to remind Marcel to take only what they need, as Marcel's spell would have harmed the forest unnecessarily. As the vines begin wrapping tighter around Marcel, the gang spot the plant spitting out an existing corpse, scaring Marcel when she learns man-eating plants normally plant seeds in its victims. Seeing no other choice, Leos aims for the plant's roots, freeing Marcel. Helping Marcel up, Leos gets excited, wanting to know how Marcel felt being tied up by the plant, but Marcel glares at Leos, weirded out by his question. Picking some fruits and vegetables, the gang head into a hollow tree, starting off by boiling the plucked vegetables only to delicately remove their seeds. Next, Senshi coats a pan with the vegetable skin, making use of some fruit, excess slime, and scorpion remains to create a mixture that can be poured into the pan. Serving up a fruit tart, all once again amazed by the dish Senshi whipped up, but they all wonder what they should do with the corpse. With Marcel instructed to not revive it, they string it up for others to take note of it, heading off for the night. With Marcel enduring a nightmare as she sleeps, Leos thinks about the journey ahead, noting that eating food is a luxury only to those who survive. Following a younger Marcel, she greets her mother, who serves her some of her favorite dishes. But upon realizing they're all made from dungeon monsters, Marcel awakens, realizing it was a nightmare. Smelling something nearby, Marcel gets jealous seeing another party eating pork with bread, but Senshi points out beginner adventurers prioritize eating breads, dried meats, and wine, but Senshi says adventurers need fats to help function. Seeing as Marcel herself is craving fatty foods, the gang agree to seek out eggs today, running into a creature with the body of a chicken, tail of a snake, and venomous fangs and claws, widely known as the Basilisk King of Snakes. As Leos fantasizes about how a basilisk will taste, the gang search around for the basilisk's nest, uncovering some freshly laid eggs, surprising Marcel as they're quite soft and narrow. Suddenly, hearing the cry of the basilisk, Leos orders everyone to hide, watching as the party they saw from earlier also sneaking into the nest, but had brought the basilisk with them. As the creature tears through the beginners, it locks onto Marcel, who runs for her life, forcing Leos to intervene with a terrifying cry, purposely making himself look big and intimidating to halt the creature. With Senshi sneaking up from behind, the basilisk sends its snake head to deal with Senshi, whilst Leos occupies the chicken head, temporarily confusing the creature and ultimately allowing Senshi and Leos to slay the basilisk. Seeing one of the other party members poisoned, the gang agree to make use of the antidote in their next meal, all rushing to skin the creature. Covering the creature with spices and stuffing it with vegetables, Senshi roasts the chicken's body, unveiling a nicely plump chicken roast. With the poison adventure fed some of the antidote-infused chicken, they all dust off the chicken. Sitting down to rest, the rookie adventurers mention how they've only started adventuring 3 months ago and have been wiped out in the same place countless times, asking Leos how they can improve, but Senshi cries that the rookies should focus on their diet, their sleep, and their workout routines. With the rookies inspired, they depart, allowing Leos and his party to descend further, worried that they won't reach the 3rd floor today. Leos says he heard the red dragon awakens every month to hunt, aiming to reach it before it awakens with an empty stomach, scaring Marcel as she falls on her butt. Seeing as Marcel needs to rest, Leos says they should choose a different path to avoid the roaming bats, prompting Marcel to offer to use her magic to clear a path. But Leos says Chilchuck can handle most of the traps they'll encounter. Needing more food before they continue, Senshi points out some mandrakes they can harvest, allowing Marcel to take charge as mandrakes are fundamental in magic and medicine. Since mandrakes will let out a loud noise when pulled from the earth, Marcel suggests they get a dog to unearth them, but realizes they have no access to such a creature. Leos suggests they use a long string to avoid hearing the mandrake's cries, but seeing everyone so conflicted, Senshi tugs on a mandrake, severing its head before its voice can be heard. Off to the side, Marcel feels pathetic since no one believes in her, choosing to prove that her method works as she opts to use a bat instead of a dog to unearth the mandrakes. Tying a long rope to a mandrake, Marcel dangles a loop in front of a bat's nest only to fire a spell to awaken the bats from their nest. As a swarm exits the nest, one gets caught by the rope, but even with the mandrake unearthed, the bat flies free, diving towards Marcel's location. With Leos and Chilchuck checking on Marcel, they notice Marcel is in complete shock, asking why Marcel did something so dangerous. Upon hearing Marcel didn't want to be a burden, Leos reminds Marcel that her magic is important in later levels, so he only wanted her to conserve her strength, asking Marcel to rely on others and not push herself. As Marcel snaps out of her daze, the gang are amazed by their food haul, watching as Senshi mixes ingredients from the basilisk, mandrakes, and bat, crafting a special omelet for the gang. Finally heading down some stairs, Chilchuck asks to borrow Leos's sword, smacking it against a wall only to reveal a hidden passage. Senshi is shocked to see Chilchuck so serious, all heading through the secret passage, but Chilchuck suddenly orders everyone to freeze, allowing Chilchuck to personally scout the area before them first. Having cleared up a path for everyone to follow, Senshi accidentally steps on a trap, freaking out Chilchuck as he orders Senshi to listen to him. Rebelling, Senshi triggers several more traps, getting screamed at by Chilchuck, who states fire traps will combust near oil traps. But hearing that there is oil nearby, Senshi says they'll have deep-fried food for their next meal. With Senshi agreeing to listen to Chilchuck agrees to lead Senshi to their oil source, all heading towards the treasure vault where Senshi spots a chest with an oil trap. As Chilchuck works his magic, he disarms the chest, wondering how he'll get the steaming hot oil out, but is asked by Senshi to let the oil rip into his pan. Letting the oil loose, Senshi catches the oil in his pan, evaluating the oil's temperature to be 180 degrees with his finger, only to ask Chilchuck to make use of the previous traps to help prepare their next meal. With Senshi prepping the meat and the batter, Senshi hands over the items to Chilchuck to cook over the fire trap, resulting in a nicely battered bat meat. As the gang sit down to enjoy the meal, Senshi admits that Chilchuck truly is a trap expert, convincing Chilchuck to teach Senshi some of his tricks in exchange for teaching him how to cook. Having made it through several more traps, Chilchuck helps the gang pass through another blocked-off passage, all feeling nostalgic having passed through the same area in the past. Leos suddenly realizes the decoration on his sword guard has disappeared, having acquired the memento 3 years ago when he was first a beginner. Having joined a gold-peeling crew, Fallon and Leos had followed their party into the second basement floor's castle, all horrified to see an adventurer's corpse had rotted away. With the other party members uncovering a room lined with pieces of armor, they all celebrate knowing they could sell the armor for a decent amount. But out of nowhere the armors move, picking off the adventurers. Choosing to flee, Leos attempts to carve a path to escape, but his sword is ultimately broken. Stealing his resolve, Leos had managed to snatch another armor sword, sadly losing his life and marking his first ever death, but was revived and had ever since carried the same sword on his adventures. As the gang re-explore their current location, they peek into a familiar room lined with living armors, all agreeing to keep battle to a minimum. Giving the signal, the gang rush through the hall, all watching as a stray armor steps out of line, forcing Senshi and Leos to dispatch it. Sadly, more armors begin to awaken, blocking off the gang's exit, forcing a retreat for now. Leos notes the armor's unusual pattern, seeing as the armors normally awaken when people move close to them. But today they seem to have preemptively moved to stop their movements, wondering where the puppet master could be hiding. With no one knowing what or where the puppet master could be, Leos suggests that 3 of them act as bait whilst one of them sneaks past the door, assigning Leos himself to sneak past them. Chilchuck does point out that living armors don't have eyes or ears, making Leos question the armor's movements a few minutes ago, but nonetheless the gang set their plan into action. Bursting through the room, the trio destroy as many armors as possible, allowing Leos to make his way through the room's massive doors, only to spot a single higher-tier living armor in the center of the room. Having never seen such a prestige-looking monster before, Leos reasons he can't ask for help, therefore he must immobilize the armor to buy some time. Sadly, Leos' strikes are easily blocked, kicked aside as he realizes he is outmatched. Seeing the armor thrust its blade, Leos defends for dear life, watching as his blade is shattered by the armor's superior sword. Seeing the armor marching towards him, Leos gets annoyed, tossing a piece of rubble at the armor's shield, but is surprised to see the armor block with its body, keeping its shield away from the piece of rubble. Upon a close inspection, Leos spots a strange cocoon attached to the back of the shield, suddenly remembering something from his childhood. Leos had once played with an egg case on a stick when he was younger, realizing that the armors are actually being controlled from within, explaining its human-like movement and orientations, and it seems the armors are all protecting the egg case. With the other 3 barely holding out, Leos racks his brain for a quick way to slay the creature hiding in the armor, ruling out a slime as the movement is too rigid along with any swarm of insect creatures as there is no buzzing sound. Having bought some time by hiding, Leos says he must confirm the creature first before slaying it, choosing to draw the armor's attention with a piece of rubble, only to tackle it from behind, forcing it to expose its body to protect its shield. Seeing an opening, Leos drags away its helmet, quickly hiding only to realize the helmet is empty. As the armor marches towards Leos, Leos fears it may be the end for him, but suddenly sees the armor swing its blade at a different pillar. Choosing to dig into the helmet's crevices, Leos draws out a mollusk to slay, only to toss its head back to the armor. With the armor busy putting back on its head, Leos once again tackles it, pinning it to the ground only to begin dismantling and carving out the other mollusk, heavily weakening the creature's control on the armor. Checking on the others, Leos sees the others may need some help, tossing the egg nest to draw the armors away, showing off his findings to the others. Leos explains that the mollusk had acted as muscles for the armor, individually controlling different sections of the armor. And this discovery also explains why the armors were so sporadic, as it was their spawning season, and they were simply fixated on protecting their eggs. Seeing Leos excited, Chilchuck and Marcel know Leos is determined to taste the mollusk, watching as Senshi and Leos discuss ways to prepare the creature. Just to make sure, Senshi removes the mollusk's organs, tossing some of them into a stir-fry of vegetables, whilst others are steamed and placed in some soup. Seeing as they all fear being poisoned, the gang watches Leos takes the first bite, all amazed to hear Leos declare the meal is delicious. Following Leos's lead, the others all try out the meal, all acknowledging that it's edible and has similar taste to mushrooms and shellfish. As the gang cleans up, they all wonder how such creatures evolve and populate, only for Leos to pick up a new prestige-looking sword. As the gang continues deeper through the dungeon, Leos realizes a creature is hiding in his new sword, choosing to conceal his new companion, hiding it from the others. Having made it through most of the third basement floor, the gang enter the Golden Castle, a location once glorious, but now is covered in dust and mold. Using his ears, Leos navigates the maze-like structure, hiding from wandering skeletons and ghouls whilst greeting other adventurers. Hearing a golem nearby, Leos suggests they head elsewhere, all knowing that golems are mud and stone that has been magically shaped and follows their master's orders. As Marcel shoots down Leos's thoughts of consuming a golem, Senshi guides the gang to his campsite, explaining that he normally hunts on the second and fourth floor, visiting the town only when he needs spices. Senshi reveals that golems maintain a great temperature and humility, making the others realize Senshi uses golems as gardens, able to fend off against insects and attackers whilst nurturing any seed planted. Since the third floor has no other good monster to harvest, Senshi only prioritizes golems, entering a secret passage only to whistle to 3 golems. Before the gang can ready their weapons, Senshi dashes forth, easily identifying the golem's core, only to destroy the golems when he removes their core. Seeing so many luscious vegetables appear from what remains of the golems, the gang joyfully take their time harvesting what they need. As for the weeds they plucked, Senshi asks everyone to help him gather them, to wither them, where he'll place them back into the soil to decompose with some fertilizer. Hearing all of this, Marcel realizes what Senshi is doing, stating that Senshi was the one who planted the cores in the golem, reminding Senshi that activating magical creatures without permission is illegal. Senshi brushes off his behavior as simple gardening, grateful that the others are helping him plant new seeds in the soil, but as they take a break, Marcel excuses herself to use the bathroom. Seeing as Marcel is gone, Senshi takes out 3 cores, planting Taro, Jiro, and Saburo into the soil, declaring that it'll take a while before the 3 golems respawn. With Leos inspired by Senshi's dedication to farming, the gang begin preparing the vegetables, prompting Senshi to start a fire. When Marcel offers to use magic to start a fire, Senshi states he needs to constantly practice his skills to ensure he doesn't get rusty, making use of the remainder of the basilisk bacon to craft a hearty vegetable-filled lunch. Leos is curious as to why the vegetables are so sweet, wondering what the remaining 1% of the golem is made of if 99% is made of soil. With Marcel refusing to answer, Senshi heads off to use the bathroom, reminding Marcel that the toilets on their current floor have been conveniently placed near hotspots. Seeing as things are way too convenient for them, the gang rush to confront Senshi, realizing he's been the one keeping the toilets clean, having used the feces and urine collected as fertilizer. Leos asks why Senshi is so dead set on living a life in the dungeon when he could have an easier time on the surface, but Senshi says it's to maintain the dungeon as a whole, revealing that there used to be 10 golems roaming floor 3, but now there is only 3. Senshi states that golems ensure no dangerous creatures from the lower floors climb to the higher floors and disrupt the ecosystem of the dungeon, and by giving back to the dungeon, Senshi can help others as well. Hearing Senchi's story, the gang are worried Senchi's absence will cost the dungeon, but Senchi reassures everyone the golems will take care of things when he's gone. Wrapping things up, the gang head off. The gang note they're carrying extra vegetables with them, wondering if they could exchange them for other goods. Heading to meet with some merchants, but upon greeting the host, the gang are asked to leave when the host hears they want to trade some vegetables. Before the gang are tossed out, the room is overrun with orcs, all slaying the corrupt people in the room, only for an orc to reach out towards Marcel. Before Laos can intervene, Senchi stops him, revealing that the orcs are his clients and friends. The orc is revealed to be Zon, mentioning how the red dragon had appeared and their settlement had been disturbed, forcing the orcs to seek refuge in a higher floor than their usual. As the orcs scour the room, they demand Laos and his party hand over all their resources. But seeing as Senchi is an old friend, the orcs agrees to house them for a night in exchange for the food. Seeing no reason to refuse, Zon takes everyone back to their base, exciting Senchi as he plans to make bread with the jar of yeast they found. Although the gang are annoyed at Senchi's priorities, they quiet down upon entering Zon's camp, all instructed to remain in a cage, all whilst Zon's son gleefully rushes to his dad. With Senchi demanding to have the ingredients to cook some bread, the others help Senchi mix and knead the bread mixture, all whilst Zon's son watches. Zon takes the chance to educate his son, retelling the times when orcs lived on the surface, only for elves and humans to force the orcs to live underground. Hearing Zon insult humans and elves, Marcel fires back by mentioning how barbaric orcs were even when left alone, prompting both Zon and Marcel to help knead some dough, all whilst arguing over which race was in the wrong. Taking a break, Zon asks Laos himself what he thinks of the old man's prophecy, reminding Laos that the person that slays the evil mage will inherit the dungeon. Laos admits he has no aspirations to inherit the dungeon, annoying Zon as he states all adventurers are lazy and greedy, getting into another argument with Marcel. Having let the dough rise, Senchi bakes the dough, revealing a nice golden brown bread. Before the gang can taste the bread, Zon declares the bread to be the orc's belonging. But suddenly Zon's son asks why Zon is being so mean. Luckily, Marcel covers for Zon, ultimately convincing Zon to share their food with the gang. With everyone sitting down for a meal, Marcel admits the orcs can cook, giving Laos the chance to reveal that his main goal is to slay the red dragon to save his sister. Seeing Laos's determination, Zon divulges that the dragon was seen 2 floors below towards the west, intrigued as Zon wonders if Laos has the makings of a king. As Zon gifts Laos a map, they all enjoy a meal as one, finally bidding the orcs goodbye as they descend further. Following a separate adventurers party, they're seen munching on their final meal before their next dungeon exploration. But suddenly someone calls out to Kabru. The man is surprised Kabru and his party had grown so much, reminding Kabru that many parties have been dismantled and gone missing, asking if Kabru himself will be the one to conquer the dungeon. Flattered, Kabru utters that he's not sure he can achieve such a goal, all whilst Rincha glares at Kabru. Finishing the meal, Rin scolds Kabru for being so humble, having wanted Kabru to yell at the man for living such a mundane life. Although Kabru doesn't disagree, he states they should show what they can do with their actions instead of words, all heading to gather supplies. Having acquired various items along with food and water for 6 people, but are forced to stop hoarding seeing as there isn't enough manpower to carry everything. McBell wonders what the lower floors are like, giving Kabru the chance to tease McBell. But as we go to several days later, the gang have made it to the 3rd basement floor. Easily slaying the creatures on their floor, Kabru notices a strange air the dungeon is giving off, having heard that the dungeon layout is shifting and monsters are more active than normal. Suddenly hearing McBell call out to them. Upon opening a chest they found on a zombie corpse, the gang strike gold, all agreeing to head back to town and cash in. Cutting back to Laos and the gang, they coincidentally run into Kabru and his party all knocked out with their loot scattered everywhere. Seeing no visible injuries, Chilchuck wonders if the gang fought over the loot, all whilst Marcel prays to prevent them from becoming zombies. When Chilchuck reaches for the nearby scattered coins, Laos's sword begins acting sporadically, shaking violently as it beckons Laos to draw it. Abiding the sword's wish, Laos raises his blade towards the coins, forcing the coins to reveal their bug-like structure. With the coins swarming the gang, Marcel notices a centipede appear from the pearls around a knocked-out adventurer's neck, swiftly releasing a stun spell to immobilize everything in her vicinity. Laos is impressed to have run into treasure bugs as it has been ages, but the gang are more curious as to how Laos detected the bug's movements, something Laos can't explain as it was his sword that alerted him. Off to the side, the trio spots Senshi breaking the treasure bugs, sorting them into edible and non-edible, intriguing Laos as he wonders how Senshi can discern the bugs. Senshi points out that bug necklaces have legs between the segments, coin bugs have an insect-like underside, ring bugs have a flexible structure, and tiara bugs float on water. Getting to work, Senshi skewers and grills the necklace bug, stir-fries the coin bugs only to grind and mix the remaining bugs, showing off a variety of bug snacks. As the gang try out the snacks, Laos personally takes a massive bite of the sweet treats, wondering if his sword and the treasure bugs are the same kind. Grabbing a fried coin, Laos confirms that his sword reacted because it was intimidated by the treasure bugs, exciting Laos as he names his new sword Kensuk. Seeing Senshi throw away the non-edible gems, Chilchuck and Marcel realize the inedible gems were actual gems that could be cashed in. Continuing on, Marcel senses a cold, tingling sensation, realizing that a ghost is nearby, due to the abundance of corpses on their floor. Chilchuck wonders why they can't just use magic to remove it, apologizing as he realizes Fallon was only capable of such a thing, something Marcel admits to as well. Seeing as a ghost has appeared behind them, they all begin to sprint, but when Laos drops his bug snack, he stays behind to retrieve it, ultimately caught by the ghost. Being slowly frozen to death, Laos struggles to break free, forcing Marcel to blow away the ghost with a fire spell, but the noise ends up alerting more ghosts to their position. Choosing to flee, Senshi learns that Fallon was an expert when dealing with ghosts, having mastered several advanced spells. Flashing back as we see Fallon casting an anti-ghost spell around their former party, reminding Marcel to never harm ghosts as they don't want the ghost to suffer, something Marcel admired about Fallon. When the former party had encountered the living corpse of a missing adventurer, Fallon courageously leapt into the corpse's arms, forcing the ghost possessing it to leave the corpse alone. With Senshi amazed by this Fallon person, the gang choose to hide in a separate room for now, afraid Marcel would have to cast several explosion spells if the ghost attacked. Luckily, Senshi unveils some items to craft holy water, confusing the trio as to who Senshi is. Senshi recounts that there are many customs and beliefs around the world, some of which include the use of fire to scare away demons, the worship of the golden beetle as it represents the sun god, offerings of alcohol to disinfect things, and salt itself as it cleanses all evil. As Senshi rushes up to finish the holy water, the ghosts all begin peeping into their room, all individually clinging to party members who hopelessly give in. Laos himself begins blaming his weaknesses, having wished for himself to be the one who was eaten, not Fallon. But before Laos can reach out to Fallon, Senshi smacks away the ghost with his makeshift holy water. Putting in the work, Senshi works his way around to all the ghosts, freeing Chilchuck from reuniting with his deceased father. Seeing Senshi miraculously fight off the ghost, Laos instructs the others to not beat themselves up for what happened to Fallon, offering to help swing around Senshi's holy water. Having cleared up all the ghosts, the gang noticed the holy water had been frozen over, opening the jar of holy water only to discover ice cream sorbet had been made. Having resolved the issue at hand, Laos states that if Fallon was here, they probably wouldn't have gotten to enjoy the ice cream, but this only sours the mood. Having been walking for a while, Laos asks if they should rest up before descending into floor 4, reminded that they only have treasure bugs as resources. Moving into a dining room, the gang notice an abundance of paintings, but no food, all wishing a hearty meal would appear before them. Out of nowhere, a nearby painting begins to spin, attempting to suck Laos in, but Marcel destroys it before anything happens. Laos scolds Marcel for ruining his fun, stating that if he were sucked into the paintings, he could at least quench his hunger with the food inside. Although the gang think Laos is crazy, they end up tying a rope to him, allowing Laos to get sucked up by one of the paintings. Flung into a new world, Laos is spotted by a maid who mistakes Laos to be a guard, swiftly handing Laos a bowl of fruit as they both rush to serve it to the king and queen. As Laos tries to look for an opening to devour some food, Laos loses his appetite, seeing King Freenag adore his newborn Prince Delgal, along with an elf praising the new prince, signaling for the others to pull him out of the painting. The gang are disappointed to see Laos return with nothing, all searching around for a more casual and fun painting, prompting Laos to leap into a new setting. Having fallen onto the table before a prince, Laos is scolded for ruining the celebration, but is relieved to hear a grown-up Prince Delgal pardon Laos's rude attitude. Now allowed to roam around, Laos reaches for a chicken drumstick, but loses his appetite, once again hearing that the king has been poisoned. Choosing to retrieve some food before he's pulled out, Laos takes note of the same elf from the other painting. But when he returns to the others, he realizes the food has disappeared, only allowed to exist in the paintings. Having had enough, Laos states he'll eat his fill whilst in the paintings, rushing into a banquet seating. Spotting Prince Delgal has inherited the throne, but more importantly, Laos stuffs his face with as much food as possible. Before Laos can leave, the same elf from earlier stops him, demanding to know who Laos is, having remembered Laos from when Prince Delgal was born along with when the king was poisoned. Seeing the elf ignite his armor, Laos signals to be pulled out. Sad to report that an elf has now recognized him, but worst of all, he is still hungry as the food doesn't return with him. Continuing through the floor, the gang arrive at an abandoned kitchen with a water source nearby. Sad they won't reach the 4th floor today. With everyone settling in for the night, Chilchuck catches a glimpse of a chest nearby, deducing that the chest must be a mimic. Choosing to hide the mimic from the others, Chilchuck utters that he has had nothing but trouble with mimics, but the others call him out for acting strange. Chilchuck simply excuses his behavior as him being tired, but is called out by Marcel for always being so secretive, having never told anyone about his age or past. That night, Chilchuck stands guard, completely famished as he chooses to retrieve some water, only to discover a coin insect nearby. Seeing the coin running towards the mimic, Chilchuck rushes after it, accidentally setting off a trap that locks him in the room with the mimic. Seeing no way of opening it from the outside, Chilchuck reasons he shouldn't yell for help as it'll attract monsters, declaring he'll break free from the inside. Upon inspecting the room, Chilchuck is annoyed by the spikes hidden in the floor along with the ancient language on the wall he can't read. Seeing as there are 3 switches in the room he must press, Chilchuck realizes there is a 4th switch near the mimic, choosing to rest for a bit as he racks his brain. Out of nowhere, a pair of claws reach out from Chilchuck's resting spot, forcing Chilchuck to dodge back as he realizes he's been sitting on a mimic, running for dear life. Chilchuck remembers he can flip a mimic to immobilize it, making use of a spike trap to flip the mimic all while sustaining minimal damage. As for the mimic he swore to avoid, he realizes the chest was empty all along, instead housing a lone insect coin with the same writing as the ancient language. Rushing to decipher the writing, Chilchuck manages to trigger the 4 rooms' traps in the correct order, barely escaping the reach of the mimic chasing after him as the mimic is crushed by the gate. With all the commotion, the others awaken to see Chilchuck barely alive, amazed he managed to catch a mimic for their next meal. With Senshi and Laos dead set on eating the mimic, Senshi first dissects and boils the creature, unveiling a freshly steamed mimic, but Laos notes how tough it is to deshell it. As Senshi and Laos force Chilchuck to hand over his lock-picking tools, the gang dine on the fresh mimic, curious as to why Chilchuck kept the mimic a secret from them. Chilchuck states he has had a horrible past dealing with mimics, stressed that the mimic would eat a coin insect he found, but is corrected as Laos states coin insects actually eat mimics. Apparently, the coins crawl into the mimics to lay eggs, allowing the newborns to feast off the mimic, waiting for the day someone discovers them, where the coins can roam free in search of more mimics. Marcel takes the chance to scold Chilchuck for being so secretive, ultimately convincing Chilchuck to reveal he is 29 years old, considered a child by Marcel and Senshi. Following Kabru, we see several older adventurers discovering their party's corpses, swiftly reviving the gang as Rin is shocked they were wiped out. On top of things, the gang realizes their loot and some of their belongings has disappeared, but the old men who revived them hide the fact that it was treasure bugs that attacked them, instead revealing that a different party passed by them. With Rin discovering a strand of hair used to ward off ghosts, Kuro puts his nose to work, sniffing out that an elf, a human, a dwarf, and a half-foot passed by, even having a meal next to their lifeless bodies. Annoyed, Kabru states they'll be chasing after them, tossing the older adventurers a payment. Watching the kids leave only to utter that they kept the treasure bugs a secret to make more cash. Back with Leos and the others, they begin to wash up before heading out, all whilst Marcel remembers her valuable soap bar had been left behind in the dragon's domain. Arriving at the 4th basement floor, the gang make note of the underground lake created from the magic-infused water, giving off a faint glow. Senshi reveals where he personally fishes and sets up traps, but Marcel shows off her magic to walk on water, something that makes Senshi throw a fit. Seeing Senshi flailing around, Leos holds Senshi down, allowing Marcel to cast the water walking spell on him, asking why Senshi hates magic so much. Senshi states that people become over-reliant on their magic, but as Leos gives Senshi a shove, the gang watches Senshi slowly begins to sink, pulling him out as they wonder why the spell isn't working. Leos realizes Senshi's dirty beard is like an insulator that weakens the spell's effect, giving Senshi the opportunity to show off his method of crossing the lake. Taking out the shell of a mimic, Senshi places it on top of the river, drawing out a majestic-looking kelpie. Although the gang are frightened at first, Senshi reassures them that he's named the kelpie and, having frequently ran into her when he fishes. When Senshi suggests that he ride and steer, and Leos says he's against it, reminding Senshi that kelpies draw people into deep waters with its beauty only to do unspeakable things. Senshi utters that he trusts and, hopping on her back as he begins to ride her, but upon seeing and begin to submerge, Leos ties some rope onto and, diving into the waters to follow the drowning Senshi. At first, Senshi is confused, seeing and acting strange, frightened upon seeing and bare her teeth, rushing to clamp onto some mimic shell Senshi is holding. Seeing no other way, Leos wrestles and stabs, and allowing Senshi to follow up. On the surface, Marcel and Chilchuck hurriedly reel in the rope, relieved to see no one is hurt. Senshi realizes and was waiting for him to ride her all along, prompting Leos to remind everyone that monsters are unpredictable, but having more than enough, Senshi declares he'll personally butcher Anne's body. Coming up with an idea, Marcel asks for some fat, working beside Senshi, but at the same time, Leos points to several objects floating in the distance, asking Chilchuck to help him investigate. Walking on water, Leos and Chilchuck discover the bodies of Kabru and their party, barely recognizing them from earlier. But upon discovering the corpse of a mermaid, Chilchuck deduces that Kabru and his party must have given their lives to slay the monster. At that moment, Chilchuck's eyes become blank, beginning to walk off towards the source of a sound only to be brought back to reality by Leo's clapping sound. Off in the distance, 2 sirens can be seen singing. Noticing Leos and Chilchuck approaching them, they quickly scurry off, frightened by Leos's singing. Choosing to place Kabru and his party's bodies on land, Leos and Chilchuck head to retrieve some scattered grains, but Leos suddenly begins wondering what a mermaid would taste like. Intervening, Chilchuck reminds Leos that a mermaid is a demi-human, creatures that embody humans and monsters. For their particular case, Leos says their mermaid lays eggs, being more monster than human, but Chilchuck still refuses to dine on a human-like creature. Heading back to the others, Leos notices they are still hard at work, choosing to make use of the scattered grains, some mimic meat, and the mermaid's seaweed hair to craft a porridge for the gang. With Marcel digging in, she notices some popping textures in the food, something Leos proudly claims as fish eggs. Pulling Leos aside, Chilchuck realizes Leos had used the mermaid's fish eggs as ingredients, quickly ceasing their conversation upon seeing Marcel checking on them. As some time passes, Marcel presents her soap created from the fat of a kelpie, helping Senshi apply the soap to his dirty beard, only to work tirelessly to comb out wrinkles. With a new and improved fluffy beard, Marcel applies her water-walking spell once more, relieved to see Senshi can now walk on water. As the gang travel across the lake, they encounter various sea creatures, forcing Marcel to cast an explosion spell, but Senshi cries that Marcel killed too many bladefish. Seeing as bladefish can be eaten many ways, warning Marcel that bladefish also serve as a pillar to other sea creatures. But Leos wonders why they haven't encountered any mid-tier monsters yet. Deep within the lake, we see several mermaids swimming to deal with the intruders, only to be captured by several tentacles, forcing the mermaids to swim by Leos and his party. As Senshi feels some rumbling on the surface of the lake, the gang are flung aside as a massive kraken appears, forcing Leos to order Marcel to prepare a spell, all whilst they distract the creature. With the kraken on hot pursuit, Marcel manages to land a direct hit on the creature, but completely unfazed, the kraken begins tangling the boys in its tentacles. Senshi notes how tough the kraken's skin is, choosing to retrieve a mermaid trident, only to ask Marcel to cast another spell for him. With Marcel trusting in Senshi's words, Marcel exposes herself to the kraken, casting water walk on the creature, forcing it out of the lake and onto the surface of the water. Seeing an opening, Senshi rushes in, plunging his trident between the creature's eyes, immediately slaying it as it turns white and loses its red color. Leos realizes the kraken had been devouring the mid-tier monsters, curious as to how the kraken tastes, but Senshi suddenly spots a parasite worming its way out of the kraken. Easily catching and killing it, Senshi begins flaying it, drizzling some sauce on it only to serve some roasted glazed parasite. Wrapping up the meal, the gang spot the kraken being devoured by the smaller fish, something Senshi recognizes as the circle of life, but at the same time Leos begins to quiver, realizing a parasite had entered his stomach, forcing the gang to rest in a nearby room. Having managed to fall asleep, the gang awakens to see Leos malnourished, a symptom of food poisoning. Seeing that Leos should be left to rest, Marcel notes how intricate the dungeon is, having learned about it in school, flashing back to a time where Marcel was a star pupil, the most brilliant female student in history. Marcel points out that her parents were court mages, asking her fellow students to be at ease when around her, only for the teacher to usher everyone into their chairs. The teacher states they'll be breeding spirits today, handing the students jars, only to ask each student to fill the jars with soil and wooden planks with a hole in the middle. From there, a barrier is cast around the jars, allowing for the jars to be injected with magic and spirits. Breeding spirits is the foundation of summoning magic and is what gives life to the dungeon, a practice known as Dugionium. With the girls asked to place their jars in the dark, they all wonder why Marcel is studying summoning magic, amazed to hear she wants to learn how to create a safe dungeon one day. Seeing the girls admiring her jar, Marcel spots a younger Fallon trip, managing to catch Fallon before she falls only to realize Fallon's jar had been incorrectly constructed. Marcel hears that Fallon is always dirty and strange, cutting to a week later where the girls all check their jars, all disappointed to see their spirits have died. The teacher asks the girls to hold a flame to their jars to check. Impressed, Marcel's flame remains lit as it shows the same number of spirits persist in Marcel's jar. At that moment, a massive flame erupts from Fallon's jar. Something the teacher notes is due to the spirits in Fallon's jar multiplying drastically. As the teacher puts out the flame, Marcel demands to know what Fallon did, hearing that Fallon had replicated the real dungeon in the jar. That evening, Fallon shows Marcel a crack in their school walls used to escape, only for both to crawl through the crack. Emerging outside, Fallon's attitude changes, becoming more carefree as she shows Marcel around a forest. Eventually, Fallon takes Marcel to a nearby cave that leads to a dungeon, freaking Marcel out as it's her first time. Luckily, Fallon takes charge, reassuring Marcel that she'll be fine if she follows her, leading Marcel to discover a magical underground lake filled with spirits. Fallon reveals she borrowed the soil from their location for her jar, something that impresses Marcel, as she hears Fallon often reads and writes in this cave. Wanting to perform experiments of her own, Marcel inspects the nearby water, leaping back when she spots a slime emerging from the lake. Before Marcel can slay the slime, Fallon tackles Marcel aside, stating that slimes won't go anywhere near sunlight and are essential for breaking down bat waste and converting the waste into magic. Seeing hundreds of bats on the roof of the cave, Marcel realizes the cave is perfectly at equilibrium, choosing to munch on some berries, all whilst Fallon begins to write a letter. Having never imagined that a dungeon would be so complex, Marcel admits she has a lot to learn, officially becoming friends with Fallon. In the present, Chilchuck refuses to believe Marcel was an A-grade student, but Marcel defends herself, more curious as to who this evil mage is to have been able to construct such a dense dungeon. Having heard everything, Leos reveals that Fallon had always written letters to him when she was in school, having always been a loner, but became more jolly when she met Marcel. Flattered, Marcel declares they'll rescue Fallon no matter what, prompting Chilchuck to point to their current location on the map and where the red dragon is. The gang estimate it'll take 2 days to encounter the dragon, but seeing as the dragon may move around, Chilchuck states they'll set up camp halfway and once more before encountering the dragon itself. Seeing as Leos is still resting, Marcel requests to wipe herself down, feeling bad as she is the only girl. Thinking back, Marcel remembered the moment where Namari and Toshiro had left their party, pissed that they would leave Fallon in the dungeon alone. Seeing as they need to get moving, the boys wake Leos up, all whilst Marcel heads to dump out the rest of her boiling water. Out of nowhere, a mysterious water ball appears from the nearby lake, suddenly firing several water beams at Marcel, forcing her to dodge. Recognizing the creature as an Udina, Marcel dives into the water to evade, swiftly casting Water Walk as she realizes Leos and the others won't be able to help. Seeing an opening, Marcel dashes to avoid another attack, bursting the water ball. Sadly, the Udina had dived back into the water, forcing Marcel to stay alert, but when Marcel tries to make it to the others, she is suddenly struck in the leg, forcing her onto her knees. Scanning the perimeter, Marcel barely catches a glimpse of the creature, struck once more only to realize her magic is running low. With no other choice, Marcel allows the creature to swim in close, blowing up the water below her only for Leos to catch her. Even though Marcel has made it to the others, the Udina simply continues to chase the gang, forcing them back into hiding as Marcel is forced to rest and recover her magic. Seeing as they can't make it past the lake without Marcel's magic, Senshi and Leos agree to create a barbecue with the Kelpie's meat, waking Marcel up. With Marcel slowly replenishing her strength with the Kelpie meat, the gang wonder what foods could replenish Marcel's magic, all whilst another group of adventurers stumble onto the scent of the gang's barbecue. Descending the spiral staircase, Namari recognizes Leos and her former party members, happily greeting them as it's been a week since the separation. Namari takes the chance to introduce her new party to House Mr. and Mrs. Tansu, scholars that pay well along with twins Kaka and Kiki. Hearing Namari's voice, Marcel demands to know why Namari abandoned Fallon. But as Marcel collapses, Namari gets a little concerned seeing Marcel's state. Leos asks if Namari's new party has a healer, but Mr. Tansu demands something in exchange, refusing to accept the Kelpie meat. With Mr. Tansu ordering the party to continue forward, Leos warns them of the Udina guarding the lake, but Mr. Tansu proudly reminds everyone that his race of gnomes are very acquainted with spirits. Standing before the Udina, Mr. Tansu attempts to speak with the Udina, but upon seeing the creature firing off some water beams, Tansu is forced to use Namari as a meat shield. Seeing no other way out, the twins rush to retrieve Namari and Mr. Tansu, embarrassed to see their method didn't work, only for Mr. Tansu to resurrect Namari. Namari is pissed that she is always someone's meat shield, but off to the side Senshi states he despises how unnatural resurrection magic is. Mr. Tansu interjects, reminding Senshi that the dungeon traps people's souls, giving people second chances to be revived, almost like a mighty curse. Mr. Tansu reveals that he came into the dungeon to study a magic circle, having been lost for a while due to Namari's guidance. Mr. Tansu agrees to heal Marcel in exchange for an escort to the nearby magic circle, an offer Leos can't refuse, choosing to personally escort Mr. Tansu alongside Senshi. Heading down some stairs, Mr. Tansu asks for some roots to be removed covering some ancient writing, but Namari takes the chance to remind Leos to buy a better sword crafted by a dwarf. Namari also scolds Senshi's beaten-up axe, wondering if Leos thinks she is annoying, but is flustered hearing Leos trust her wholeheartedly when it comes to weapon knowledge. At that moment, Leos's blade detects something, prompting Leos to report that he senses a creature down the stairs, but Mr. Tansu could care less, ordering Kiki to draw the creature out. When Kiki attempts to investigate with her crossbow, several tentacles wrap around and pull her into the ceiling, making Mr. Tansu beg the gang to save Kiki. Namari suggests they get ensnared to help free Kiki, but Leos reveals that tentacles from the monster will inject poison into them, making Leos instead ask to borrow Senshi's helmet. Seeing Leos declaring he'll head up there alone, Namari gets weirded out hearing that Leos will be counting on Senshi and herself, watching as Leos is ensnared. With Leos beginning to lose feeling in his body, he manages to make his way over to Kiki's crossbow, cutting the tentacles binding it only to cry for Namari to aim for its midsection. Leaping forth, Senshi catches and tosses the crossbow to Namari, allowing Namari to land a direct shot on the creature's midsection, freeing Leos and Kiki. Returning to the others, Mr. Tansu begins healing Kiki, all whilst the others squeal at Leos's swollen face. Seeing Senshi return with some of the roots, the gang learn that the ivy tentacle can be suppressed with some vinegar, allowing Senshi to peel it open, replicating a banana. Handing the tentacle around, Namari refuses the offer, all whilst Mr. Tansu finishes healing Kiki. Moving on to Marcel, Mr. Tansu amazes everyone as his healing magic instantly heals Marcel's wounds. But upon hearing that Namari had helped Leos, Marcel swallows her pride and thanks Namari. Before both girls can fight, Leos defuses the situation, all choosing to check on the Udina that is still guarding the lake, all disappointed that Marcel had agitated it when she poured boiling water on it. Mr. Tansu knows that Udinas are spirits, and if they remove the central spirits, the Udina will die off and be reborn. Since this will naturally occur in 1 week's time, Mr. Tansu orders his party to return to the surface with a return spell, but Leos asks if they could take Marcel with them. Leos points out that Marcel won't be able to recoup her magic in the dungeon, but Marcel begs to stay, making Namari laugh as she points out that Leos and his party stand no chance against the Red Dragon without Marcel. Seeing as Namari herself had defeated many Red Dragons before, Marcel begs Namari to rejoin her party, promising to gather the funds and pay her right when it's over. Sadly, Chilchuck knows that Namari is in financial hardship, and if Namari were to jump from party to party, it would tarnish her reputation. Seeing no other choice, Marcel declares she'll drink the Udina. The only issue is how they'll capture and drink the Udina. As Marcel racks her brain for solutions, she wonders if they could use Senshi's cooking pot to defend against the Udina, but when Namari hears that the item had been passed down from his family, Namari realizes the pot had been crafted from adamant. Namari quivers, uttering that adamant can easily cut through and withstand the attacks of a dragon, giving the gang the idea to capture and fry the Udina in the indestructible pot. Seeing only one chance, Leos and Senshi ready the pot and lid, but when the Udina attacks, Leos is easily blown back. Inside the room, Namari begins to grow agitated, fearing Leos won't be strong enough, and instead chooses to take Leos's place. Working with Senshi, Namari and Senshi capture the Udina, tossing and holding it over a fire until the creature ceases its movements. With Marcel grateful for Namari's help, Marcel downs a cup Udina's water, but seeing as it'll be hard to absorb spirit magic, the gang start using the liquid to cook. Cutting up some ivy tentacles and seasoning some kelpie meat, Marcel helps create a stew with the Udina's liquids, serving the gang a bowl each. Namari gets freaked out, hearing her former party had to resort to scavenging to make up for lost funds. But upon tasting the stew, is relieved to see not everything is bad. Seeing Mr. Tansu prepare to leave, Namari convinces the others to sit down for a meal, all cleaning up as Namari learns Chilchuck has stuck by Leos as he had a debt to pay off. Leos asks if Namari knows where Shuro is, learning that Shuro loved Fallon, so he probably is still searching for her in his own way, but just like that the two party part ways. Finally passing through the lake, the gang run into some stairs that'll take them to the 5th basement floor, but Chilchuk states there is an abundance of tentacles blocking their path. Leos reminds everyone that the orcs probably used said trap to scare away adventurers, choosing to hack away at the tentacles to carve a path, but just then Chilchuk pulls Marcel away from the wall, watching as a tentacle emerges from a crack. Chilchuk despises the fact that tentacles grow over traps, concealing and introducing randomness to existing traps. But as Leos checks on his progress, he realizes it'll take ages to descend, wondering how the orcs made it past the tentacles. At that moment, a tongue reaches out to snatch Leos's sword, revealed to be a giant frog that merely tosses Leos's sword down the center of the stairs. When Marcel blows away one of the frogs, another simply snatches her staff only to toss it away as well, prompting 2 other frogs to surround Senshi, both attempting to snatch away Senshi's axe. With Senshi holding on tight, Chilchuk notices a trap next to the frog that can be used to blow it away, but wonders why giant frogs are immune to the toxic tentacles. Out of options, Chilchuk wraps some frog skin around his palms, heading down to trigger the trap, but realizes a tentacle is in the way of the trap. Unfortunately, the frog holding Senshi's axe opts to devour Chilchuk, but as the gang rescue Chilchuk, Leos gets an idea seeing Chilchuk use the frog skin. As Leos prepares to craft something from the frog skin, Senshi begins to use the frog's meat and tentacles to whip up some gnocchi and pasta. Eating up, the gang don their frog suits, nonchalantly making their way through the swarm of tentacles, making it to the bottom where they retrieve their lost weapons. Spotting the castle town, they all confirm they have made it to the 5th floor, all shocked to see there are signs of people fleeing the town. As the gang prepare to explore the town, Marcel learns that the inside of the frog suit has become stuck to their clothing, all whilst Mr. Tansu and the others return to the surface. Immediately heading out to report to the Lord of the Island, Mr. Tansu states that all the loot up till the 3rd floor had been plundered, plus orcs have been reported terrorizing people in the upper floors. Mr. Tansu advises that the Lord set a reward to deal with the orcs, but the Lord wonders how the orcs made it to the upper floors so easily, hearing that it may have been through the use of some old dwarf mines. The Lord is annoyed seeing how dwarves are like moles, having heard a long time ago that elves and dwarves were at war, and the tunnels and mines dug were a result of the dwarves' strategy to hide and attack. As a result, rumor has it that the Golden City was swallowed into the dungeon due to these tunnels. But Mr. Tansu asks that the Lord not believe in such rumors. As for the magic circle he discovered, Mr. Tansu states that the spell is from the work of an elf, wondering if the evil lunatic of a mage that created the dungeon was an elf. The Lord reveals that he had received a request from the Western elves recently, asking the Lord to return the dungeon to them. But Mr. Tansu furiously states that the elves stole the land from the dwarves and gifted it to the humans. With Mr. Tansu calming down, the Lord states the king of the elves granted the humans this land, wondering if the Western elves are after the dungeon's remaining treasure. Mr. Tansu corrects the Lord, stating that it's the spell of immortality cast on the dungeon, along with the spell that ties the soul to the body that the elves want, advising the Lord to figure out the dungeon's mysteries first. When the Lord grows hesitant of how to proceed, Mr. Tansu declares that the Lord must get a hold of the blueprint needed to create the dungeon's great magic, tempting the Lord with the respect from the elves if he does. Seeing as the Lord is desperate as well, Mr. Tansu suggests that the Lord not hoard his wealth and instead invest into the adventures, intrigued to see how far Leos and his party will go. At the same time, Namari awakes for a nap, satisfied to finally be paid, but swiftly heads out seeing as she needs to head back to the dungeon for another errand. As the twins accompany Namari to the Resurrection Temple, Namari asks if any corpses matching Fallon have shown up, but sadly the receptionist states none match the description. Back with Leos, the gang head through the castle town outside the Golden Castle, reaching the orcs' previous settlement. Seeing as the orcs were in a hurry to evacuate, the gang finds some flour and alcohol, exciting Senshi as he wants to make bread. Peeping through another door, The gang are horrified to discover the burnt-up corpses of wargs incinerated by a dragon's breath. Having confirmed that the dragon is now awake and roaming, Marcel begins to doubt her chances of survival. Calming her down, Chilchuck reminds everyone that he won't be able to participate, but Senshi wonders how Laos dealt with dragons in the past, hearing that Fallon would cast protective spells prior. Then Laos, Shuro, and Namari would engage the dragon. Marcel would support with offensive spells, and Shuro would deal the finishing blows. Seeing as their party has changed drastically, Laos states they must target the underside of the dragon's neck, but Senshi is curious as to how big a red dragon is. Using the destroyed surroundings as reference, Laos reminds everyone that the dragon is huge, wondering if they could jump onto the dragon using the surrounding buildings. Marcel also points out she isn't as gifted as Fallon, unable to ease someone's fall or cast fire protection spells. Plus, their current weapons won't do any good harming the dragon. Marcel adds that she can prepare an explosion spell to stun the dragon at best, but wonders if Laos or Senshi can land the killing blow, suddenly giving Laos an idea. Laos suggests they collapse the surrounding building onto the dragon, pinning it so there won't be any risk of counterattacks from the dragon. Plus, they can lure the dragon around town to buy time for Marcel to cast her explosion magic. Laos does wonder why the dragon has appeared on the 5th floor, a location that is quite narrow, but Chilchuck reminds everyone that Senshi's pot can be used as a weapon against the dragon. Seeing as they have a solid plan, the gang spends some time mapping out the town, only to head back to their base where Senshi has prepared some bread. Seeing as they made the mistake of fighting the dragon on an empty stomach last time, the gang indulge in Senshi's deep-fried breaded fog. Appreciating the moment, Laos thanks everyone for making it this far with him, all suddenly hearing the red dragon appear. With some final words of encouragement, Marcel casts some defensive spells on the boys, only for the party to get into positions. With Marcel stationed inside a castle, she finishes up preparations, reasoning that an all-out stun spell would be more useful than several small explosions. Scouring the area, the red dragon locks onto Laos and the others, rushing after the gang at a moderate pace, only to be lured down an alley. Seeing as the dragon can't pass through the tight alley as easily, our trio intentionally draws out the dragon's breath, only to hold up Senshi's pot as a shield, amazed that the pot along with Marcel's spells protected them. Sadly, the lid is too hot for Laos to hold, forcing the trio to continue down the tunnel, rushing into a spare room upon seeing the dragon firing off another breath. Off in the distance, Marcel witnesses several explosions as planned, horrified to see the trio rushing towards her ahead of schedule. Having no time to think, Marcel detonates the building below her, perfectly collapsing the building onto the dragon. But in mere moments, the dragon emerges from the rubble unharmed. With Marcel flung away, the trio choose to play dead, noticing the dragon tower over them. But before Laos can reach the dragon's neck with his sword chooses to flee, forcing everyone to retreat below the red dragon. Seeing no way out, Marcel tries to draw the dragon's attention, but when Senshi cleaves at the beast with his axe, his blade shatters. As a last resort, Senshi unveils his mithril cooking knife, a blade that Laos plunges into the dragon seamlessly, but realizes it's too short to do any impactful damage. As the dragon begins flattening their location, Marcel rushes to find a solution, all whilst the boys are slowly backed away from Laos's sword, all beginning to despair. Senshi steals his resolve, stating that he'll draw the dragon's attention, rushing towards Laos's sword only to be crushed before he can reach it. Seeing Senshi barely alive, Chilchuck holds Laos back from rushing out mindlessly, instead asking Laos to find Marcel, all whilst Chilchuck checks on Senshi. Spotting Senshi's cooking knife, Chilchuck tosses the blade into the dragon's eye, giving Senshi enough time to toss Laos's blade. With Laos rushing into a destroyed building with Senshi's pan, Senshi and Chilchuck are smothered in rubble, all whilst Laos manages to run into Marcel. As Laos reports that the others are running out of time, he states he'll head upstairs where Marcel will blow him towards the dragon neck, using the dragon's damaged eye as a way to sneak towards its neck. Reassuring Marcel that their plan will work, Laos has Marcel set up an explosion spell, blowing Laos perfectly onto the dragon's face. Having predicted that the dragon would flail, Laos holds on tight, using the memories of Fallon to motivate Laos to place his leg into the jaws of the dragon. From there, Laos anchors his leg in the dragon's jaw, pivoting only to stab at the weak spot in the dragon's neck. With both Laos and the dragon collapsing due to their wounds, we follow Laos as he revisits a memory of him with Fallon visiting a nearby graveyard to investigate some ghosts. When Laos had run into a ghost, the ghost had begged Laos to help him, freezing Laos over. Luckily, their father had managed to arrive before things got serious. But Fallon had listened to the ghost, instructing the villagers to remove the ring from a recently deceased man. From that day forward, Laos had encouraged Fallon to dive deeper into her knowledge of ghost magic, offering to travel everywhere with Fallon. Flashing forward, Laos sees Fallon leaving him, suddenly waking up to hear Marcel has stopped his severed leg from bleeding. As Marcel heads to search for the others, she is relieved to see the boys aren't dead, swiftly healing Chilchuck only to offer to heal Senshi. Retrieving Laos's severed leg, Marcel stitches his leg, reassuring his itchiness is simply a side effect of healing magic. Having succeeded in slaying the dragon, the gang are grateful for one another, but Chilchuck wants to ask about Laos's sword later. First, they slice open the scales guarding the dragon's stomach, slowly making their way around the ribs only to pull out the stomach. As it's the moment of truth, the gang cut open the stomach, mortified to see it's empty, quickly searching the intestine only to realize there is nothing in there as well. Realizing there is still hope, the gang slice open the dragon's fuel sack, uncovering human hair lodged inside. Racing to search for human remains, they begin cleaning off the remains they find, first uncovering Fallon's staff only to discover a human skull. With everyone speechless, Marcel admits she is unsure if revival is possible for the corpse, but Laos refuses to give up, searching for the remainder of the bones as he plans to take it to the resurrection office. Marcel states that they shouldn't move the corpse as it may disrupt the corpse's connection to the soul. Plus, they normally need double the flesh and blood of the victim to be sacrificed to fully revive someone. Knowing that this is the perfect time, Marcel reveals she used to study ancient magic that now is banned, magic people know as black magic. When Marcel asks if she has permission to attempt to revive Fallon, Laos immediately asks Marcel to pull the trigger, seeing as they can use the dragon's remains as sacrifice. Slicing her hand, Marcel infuses her blood into the staff, starting off by reconstructing Fallon's skeletal structure. But first, they must separate Fallon's bones from the ward bones the dragon also consumed. By tackling different body parts at a time, the gang separates out Fallon's skull, spine, legs, arms, and finally the smaller, more intricate pieces. With Fallon and the wargs separated, Marcel begins her incantation, uttering some tongues as the surrounding skies become dark, watching as the blood and remains of the dragon begin slowly warping around Fallon's skeleton. As Marcel collapses, Laos heads over to the corpse, watching as it sits up. Hearing its voice, Laos is relieved to see Fallon is alive, rushing to cover her up as Laos wakes Marcel to tell her the good news. Seeing her best friend, Marcel leaps into Fallon's arms, breaking down as Chilchuck introduces Senshi to Fallon. Seeing as they need to eat, the girls first head to clean off, prompting Marcel to scrub Fallon clean as she checks every nook and cranny of Fallon's body. Seeing Marcel pretty depleted of mana, Fallon attempts to share her mana with Marcel, but Marcel asks Fallon to hold back until she's better. Fallon admits that she doesn't remember what happened, freaking out as she demands to know what happened to the others that fought the Red Dragon, but is relieved hearing everyone made it out safe. Fallon does ask what the bloody magic circle is on the floor, asked by Marcel to not stress out about such things since they can remove the circle and move on with life, especially since Fallon has returned to them. Back outside, Chilchuck asks what Laos will do moving forward, knowing they'll have to take the main road to head out of the dungeon. Laos admits he'll just figure things out once they make it out of the dungeon, but Chilchuck finds it strange that Marcel hid her black magic from everyone plus an elf like her doesn't yearn to explore the dungeon. When Marcel appears, she asks everyone to keep her dark magic a secret, spotting Fallon arriving as well, having just passed by Senshi preparing to cook beside the dragon. With everyone rushing towards Senshi's location, Leos cries that Senshi shouldn't start a fire near the dragon's spilled oiled bag, but sadly it's too late, all suddenly engulfed in flames as Senshi lights a fire. Luckily, the gang are protected by some magic, revealed to be Fallon, who instinctively casted some barrier magic to protect everyone. But the gang are upset the stomach section of the dragon is on fire and will take some time to put out. Improvising, Senshi mixes up some dough, making use of the dragon's tail to harvest some meat, only to serve some pizzas and huge chunks of roasted dragon's meat. Taking the first bite, Fallon becomes addicted to the monster's meat, prompting the others to dig in as they compare the dragon's tender taste to other monsters. Seeing Leos get fired up over the dragon's meat, Fallon learns that the gang had to hunt and cook monsters to survive, but this amazes Fallon as she wants to hear all about the gang's adventure. Running through their adventures, Leos ends up showing off the sword he picked up, revealing that it's a living sword, explaining Leos's unusual reactions to the treasure bugs and tentacle ivies. Chilchuck scolds Leos for keeping such a secret from his party, something Leos admits was wrong, but states he plans to keep the living sword until he finds a better one. Settling in for the night, the gang are excited to sleep on beds, but Fallon turns to spot a little girl, apologizing as they'll be using her home for the night. With Leos confirming that Fallon was speaking with a ghost, Fallon and Marcel decide to share a bed, exciting Marcel as she exclaims how relieved she is to see Fallon is back with them. Choosing to say good night to Leos, Fallon notices Leos scratching his leg, instantly healing the stitch as she accuses Leos of doing something crazy. Firing back, Leos asks that Fallon never risk her life to save his again, both promising to keep each other safe, but Fallon admits she can't remember everything just yet. As Fallon and the others head to sleep, we cut outside to the magic blood circle Marcel drew, watching as an elf discovers what remains of Marcel's ancient magic. At night, Senshi prioritizes rationing out the dragon's meat, but out of nowhere Fallon awakens, slowly heading outside, only to begin mindlessly roaming the streets. Although the ghosts tug at Fallon doesn't budge, only to stand before the mysterious elf. The elf demands to know what Fallon is doing, having already assigned her to search for a certain king. But at the same time, we see Leos has awoken as well. Having heard a loud noise, Leos notices Fallon is no longer sleeping with Marcel, waking Marcel up only to learn that Fallon must have snuck out of their room, horrified to realize she leapt from such a height. Freaked out, Leos quickly heads outside to search for Fallon, but seeing the dragon's corpse further decaying, Leos uncovers Fallon had knelt down and is muttering to herself. Checking on Fallon, Leos's sword begins to react, all whilst Leos hears Fallon saying she needs to search for Lord Delgal. Before Leos can react, the elf suddenly appears behind him, revealing that everything on this earth belongs to King Delgal, something that terrifies Leos as he recognizes the elf from the painting he entered. With all the pieces falling together, Leos deduces that the elf before him is the lunatic magician who created the dungeon, frozen in place as the elf reaches out to him. Luckily, Marcel fires off a warning shot ordering the elf to not move, but as the elf locks onto Marcel and the others, Leos tries to escape with Fallon. Sadly, Fallon begins to act strange, monstrally knocking Leos away, but at the same time we see the elf reveal a spellbook of their own. In mere moments, the elf begins uttering an ancient spell that summons forth creatures from the dragon's blood, an attack Marcel can't evade. Seeing as ordinary magic won't phase the bloody summons, Marcel uses her own blood to overwrite the attacking creatures, something that surprises everyone. Having cleared the creatures, Marcel asks if the elf is the creator of the dungeon, but the elf simply creates a rift in the ground, plunging the gang into a deeper floor. As the elf turns to face Fallon, we see several ghosts intervene, but the elf doesn't attack them, reassuring the ghosts that the king will return and they can all celebrate together. Standing before Fallon, the elf calls for Fallon to reveal its true form, choosing to gift Fallon with a new body as it demands Fallon to continue with its original mission. Following the gang, they seem to be trapped in a brick box, all freaking out as the walls begin to close in on them. But as Marcel prays for a second chance at life, several ghost hands appear through the wall, pulling Marcel through a trapdoor. As the gang follow Marcel's lead, they successfully escape the trapped room, all preparing to leave, but suddenly a swarm of ghosts surround them. Unprepared for the encounter, Chilchuck and Senshi muster up their remaining strength to fight, but the ghosts simply vanish before harming the gang. Chilchuck decides to scope out the area whilst the others recover. But when he opens the door, he encounters several orcs who demand to know how people entered their territory. Lead, the female orc leader, gets excited to slay an elf and human. But suddenly Senshi speaks up, declaring that he knows Lead is Zaun's sister and that they're friends with Zaun. Luckily, the orcs recognize Senshi as their vegetable dealer, all amazed to learn that Laos and the gang had slain the red dragon for them, swiftly rewarding the gang with their orc concoction. Taking charge, Lead personally mouth feeds Laos and Marcel the concoction. But seeing as this is the perfect time, Chilchuck asks Lead if she knows anything about an elf magician. Immediately, Lead cries that there's an elf that governs the dungeon and is responsible for maintaining order in the dungeon, and this would explain why the elf appeared now, seeing as the red dragon must have been a monster the elf was controlling. Chilchuck fears that both Laos and Marcel will want to continue chasing after Fallon once they wake up. He suggests they lie, but Senshi is clearly against deceiving the others, forcing Chilchuck to admit he fears death more than anything. When Chilchuck asks if Lead and her orcs can escort him out of the dungeon, Lead gets pissed seeing how spineless Chilchuck is, but Senshi steps in asking Lead to help Chilchuck, seeing as Chilchuck isn't a bad guy. With Senshi remaining behind with the others, Chilchuck follows Lead, all whilst cursing at the foolishness of the others to stay behind, but Lead asks if abandoning his friends was the right thing to do. Chilchuck tries explaining how they're searching for a friend, but out of nowhere a ghost appears behind Chilchuck, nonchalantly passing by him as Lead reveals the ghosts are residents of the city and are actually quite intellectual. Seeing the ghost asking for them to follow it, the gang end up back at the location of the dragon corpse, but it seems the corpse is gone. Chilchuck utters that the burn markings on the ground was because they set the dragon on fire, but luckily Fallon had protected them with a protection spell, even though she was surprised she managed to cast it. Lead grows more impressed hearing how heroic Laos was to have given up his leg to slay the dragon, but Chilchuck wonders if joining the gang was the right thing to do, only to finally make it back to their resting place. As Chilchuck packs his stuff, he continues to tell Lead about how Marcel saved them from the attackers the elf summoned, but feeling pathetic, Chilchuck admits to being a coward that leaves his friends behind. Lead says she knows Chilchuck values his friends a lot, but as they continue back along their route, Chilchuck suddenly bumps into Laos's sword, noticing a strange blood trail that leads from the dragon's corpse. Choosing to return to the others to say his final goodbye, Chilchuck notices Laos attempting to leave, swiftly tackling him as Chilchuck cries, "Laos needs rest." Chilchuck admits he feels sympathy for Laos, but Chilchuck cries that their party isn't ready to deal with the elf nor chase after Fallon, begging Laos to return to the surface and report their findings in hopes for a better chance to find Fallon later. Senshi backs Chilchuck up, seeing as resting and returning is the best plan. Plus, Lead has reported the red dragon's death to Zaun, and the orcs plan to assist Laos once he returns. Seeing as it's the right thing to do, Laos agrees to leave for now and return in the future. Elsewhere, we see Mr. Tansu waking up Kabru and his party with some goat's blood, ordering Kabru to head back to town to recover, seeing as they were seemingly saved from drowning. Kuro puts his sniffer to the test, confirming that the people that looted their bodies also saved them. But before the party can leave, Mr. Tansu asks to be paid for waking everyone up. Kabru remembers that they were attacked by some mermaids, but seeing Namari, Kabru seemingly recognizes her, pissing Rin off as she accuses Kabru of flirting with everyone. Mick Bell cries that their rations have also been looted, but making the right decision, Kabru declares that their party will head back to the surface to restock, seeing as they're lucky to be saved in the first place. Following their captain's lead, they all agree to prioritize their safety, but as they all cross the lake towards the stair that leads upwards, Kabru notices an absurd amount of fog enshrouding them. Seeing as his party has vanished, Kabru draws his sword, spotting a fishman marching towards him. Realizing that he's surrounded, Kabru desperately defends for dear life. But feeling the weight of the attacking monster strikes, Kabru drops his sword, tackling the monster in front of him to the ground. Kabru realizes the monster before him is his party member Dia the dwarf, uttering that there has been illusion magic cast around them to trick them into fighting each other. But having identified Kuro, Home, and Mick, Kabru realizes Rin herself has begun to cast a spell. Fearing the aftermath of Rin's magic, Kabru rushes to kiss Rin, smoothly stopping Rin from blowing up her own party. Spotting two fishmen wielding tridents, Kabru rushes to knock them out, but seeing as the illusion spell is still in effect, Kabru locks onto a particular fishman standing in the back. Rushing to slay the fishman, Kabru watches as the illusion spell is removed, realizing the attacker before them is the corpse retriever that had saved them earlier. Kabru states that he knows corpse retrieval pays better than slaying monsters, and deduces that the men had simply followed them into the deeper floors in hopes Kabru's party will get wiped in order to revive them and cash in another revival job. Sadly, Kabru's party was already revived by Mr. Tansu, and since the men were greedy, they tried tricking Kabru's party to slay each other with illusion magic. The men admit it would have been nice if Kabru brawled with Mr. Tansu's party. That way the men could have revived and cashed in on 2 revival jobs. But this annoys Kabru, as he says adventures attacking other adventures is a crime. When Kabru threatens to report the men to the Lord of the Island, the men ask that Kabru take the 2 men he knocked out to the resurrection office and get paid for retrieving their bodies, striking a deal to take 30% of the proceeds Kabru makes, something that entices Kabru. Before Kabru can carry the knocked out men, Kabru turns his weapon onto the leader of the men, instantly slaying him only to slaughter his 2 friends. With only 1 man left, he begs to be spared, seeing as they only care about money. But hearing the man's pathetic pleas, Kabru puts him out of his misery. Choosing to dump the bodies for the surrounding fish to feed on, Kabru apologizes for leading their party into such a slump, but Rin says it can't be helped seeing as their party skill level isn't that advanced. Kabru knows the Lord of the Lands only cares about profit and money, but seeing as there is no excitement or incentive to continue to explore the dungeon, it seems adventurers will no longer venture into the dungeon and slay the monsters, eventually causing the monsters of the dungeon to spill out. Kabru declares they'll lift the curse of the dungeon to ensure no such thing can harm the innocent citizens living on the surface, but out of nowhere Mick Bell reports they've found food and loot on the men that attacked them. But sadly, Kabru says they'll only be taking the men's food and dumping the remainder in the lake. With Kabru's party agreeing to be kind souls, they all settle for a well-earned meal, all wondering how such scummy men made it past the screening process to claim rewards, or if the men are part of a more larger corrupt operation, regrettably agreeing that they won't be reporting the men to the Lord of the Land. Kabru fears that newbie adventurers like Doni would be affected, but changing topics, Kabru wonders who the party of 4 that save them are, surprised that an elf was amongst them. Kabru asks Rin and Home if they recognize the ghost warding spell cast on them, prompting Rin to inspect the blonde hair tied around Kabru's arm, annoyingly stating that the spell must be the work of an honor student that graduated from a top magic school. Realizing something, Kabru utters that it would be an honor, in fact, to meet the party that saved them, suspecting the Tudin siblings to be the one to have been their saviors. Home asks why Cabris believes it was the Tudin siblings, hearing that Fallon graduated from a magic school, and seeing as Fallon was close with an elf that also graduated from the same magic school. It has to be them. Kabru also deduces that the party must have been venturing into the dungeon to retrieve a lost party member, and seeing as they just saw Namari with a different party, Kabru suspects their original party broke up due to income and gold disputes. Kabru also mentions how there must be a new dwarf in their party, seeing as Kuro smelled a dwarf with Leos's current party, but Dia brings up that Namari is the daughter of the prestigious arms dealer of the island, but was kicked out for embezzlement one day. Mick adds that Chilchuk is a middle-aged man that is only after money. As for Shuro, Mick asks if Rin knows anything, seeing as they're both Easterners, but seeing as they're from different islands, she has nothing on Shuro. Kabru says he heard Shuro had come to their land with several others and joined Leos's party to test his skills. But now that they've left the party, Kabru can't help but grow more excited to uncover everyone's motives for doing things. Kabru's party hear that Leos used to peel gold and share his funds with sick adventurers. But this caused most adventurers to pretend to be ill and take advantage of Leos's kindness, meaning Leos himself is not to be trusted with inheriting the dungeon, seeing as Kabru himself will be the one to rule the dungeon. Sadly, seeing as they've got a long way to go, they continue over the lake, but as hundreds of fish swarm them, the gang spot a massive sea serpent attacking them. Kabru is overwhelmed seeing the creature and knocking around his party, but attempting to calm his breathing, Kabru focuses on the serpent's movements. Before Kabru can attack the serpent, Hein appears, tossing an explosive into the serpent, only to call for Inyate to blow the creature back. As the finishing touch, Shuro himself decapitates the creature with a single slash. But as Maizuru tries complimenting Shuro's amazing power, Shuro ignores the compliment, demanding his party follow him deeper into the dungeon, stressing his party as Shuro is quite malnourished, having been fixated on Fallon all this time. Having a stroke of luck, Kabru thanks Shuro's party for saving him, greeting Shuro only to reveal that he has information on Fallon, something that immediately catches Shuro's attention as they all agree to merge parties. Back with Leos's party, 2 days have passed, but they are apparently lost with no idea of how to leave their location. Chilchuck is annoyed seeing as the original layout of the floor is changing, something Marcel believes to be the work of the Mad Magician. And seeing as there are monsters roaming the area, the gang will have to be sneaky. With the Red Dragon gone, the city's monsters have begun to return, but worst of all, both Leos and Marcel both seem to be exhausted and hungry, something that makes Senshi guilty as he feels responsible for feeding the party. Luckily, Chilchuck manages to sniff out some flowers, rushing over to inspect the location only to uncover a graveyard with mysterious people seemingly embracing each other. Before Chilchuck is entranced, Senshi covers Chilchuck's eyes, leading the entities to lunge at Chilchuck, but Leos appears cutting open one of the attackers. Seeing a mist appear from the entities, Leos declares the creatures to be dryad flowers, entities that emit spores that cause hay fever. Since both Senshi and Leos have been blinded by their allergies, Chilchuck is forced to help guide Senshi to slay an attacking dryad, only to be sprayed with more pollen. With only one dryad left, Chilchuck is forced to rely on his senses now that he is blinded as well, barely able to slay the last dryad. Elsewhere, Marcel is seen depressed about her broken staff, horrified to see the boys return after slaying some dryads, creatures that are neither male nor female. Seeing as they're out of food, Leos discovers some dryad fruits they can devour, but Senshi wonders why the last dryad they slayed didn't release any pollen. Leos says the last dryad must have been female and must have been protecting its fruits before pollination. But as the gang plucks some buds that are meant to grow into dryads in the future, they manage to gather a decent harvest alongside some mandrakes. Getting to work, Senshi begins dicing and boiling a portion of the ingredients, creating a mash. Next, Senshi chooses to grill the dryad buds, topping them with cheese to create some pumpkin pottage and sauté buds. Marcel is still against consuming such grotesque vegetables, but delighted by the sweet taste, Marcel quietly accepts the meal, prompting Leos to savor the cheesy buds. The gang fear that the morphing dungeon will prevent them from ever leaving, but the gang reason they should start noting down any patterns the dungeon exhibits, exciting Marcel as she declares she'll have to teach Leos some healing and defensive magic if they want to survive the magician's wrath. Seeing as Fallon has already taught Leos the fundamentals from the gnome system, Marcel offers to build on Leos's magic knowledge, all while Senshi tries standing in for Chilchuck's deceased father, attempting to explain the birds and the bees to Chilchuck. Choosing to stay in an abandoned house, Marcel takes Leos's hand, asking him to place it on one of her wounds whilst ordering Leos to sync up his breathing with hers. Repeating Marcel's spell, Leos manages to heal a small scratch from Marcel's ear, and seeing as Senshi is in need of some healing, Senshi is Leos's next test subject. In the meantime, Marcel tries repairing her staff with sticks from the dryads, But seeing Senshi behaving shy before Leos can heal him, Marcel reminds the boy's skin-on-skin contact is normal. Chilchuk says he prefers if Leos developed his social skills as a leader, calling out Marcel's use of black magic. But Marcel wonders if Chilchuk's hatred towards magic may be because his kind were kidnapped by elves who tampered with black magic in the past. Marcel chooses to explain the type of black magic she is studying, elaborating by asking how someone would scale a spell from a small incantation to a much larger one. Marcel says she mainly uses coordinate magic, similar magic that connects sections of the dungeon to other dimensions and allows monsters to be summoned in the first place. Marcel reveals that since Fallon couldn't revive herself, Marcel had rewrote a section of the dungeon to integrate Fallon into the dungeon in order to resummon her, but out of nowhere the dungeon begins to shake. Glancing outside, the gang notice bricks from a nearby castle moving strangely. But before the gang can investigate, Leos collapses, experiencing mana sickness as it is his first time using magic. The gang chooses to leave Leos to suffer and recover on the floor, inspecting the shifting dungeon structure. But as the gang leave from a moving platform, they suddenly encounter a cockatrice, a more dangerous version of the basilisk. As the gang flee into the nearest room, Senshi declares that the cockatrice's snake head allows the monster to pick up heat signatures and has a petrifying bite, plus the rooster head has heightened vision, making fleeing a difficult option for the gang. Remembering how Leos fought the basilisk, Marcel begrudgingly heads outside, fearing that her shouting and wailing won't intimidate the creature, but seeing as she is the tallest out of the trio, she steals her resolve. Turning the corner, Marcel draws the creature's attention with a massive explosion, prompting Senshi to strike the snake head, but his cut is too shallow. Realizing she messed up, Marcel is forced to tank a snake bite, barely managing to explode away the snake head, all while Senshi follows up by cleaving at the rooster head, successfully slaying the creature. Returning to Leos, the gang report Marcel's snake bite, horrifying Leos as he orders Marcel to huddle up and wait for the petrification to take action. But Marcel cries for a solution. Suddenly, Marcel's body turns to stone, annoying Leos as her body is in an awkward position to move. Apparently, petrification is a curse that you can naturally heal from, but there is also the option of searching for other adventures with a healer that could reverse such a curse. But Leos himself says he could try to heal Marcel, as Leos gets to work searching for a spell to reverse Marcel's curse. Chilchuk fears that Marcel will topple over and break, so Senshi uses her to help hold and store some of their food. With 4 days passing of trial and error, the gang try plastering Marcel with some herbs, all whilst Leos tries out another spell, but surprisingly Marcel is finally freed from her stone prison. Heading outside, Chilchuk reports he had managed to jot down some patterns the dungeon is exhibiting, first declaring that when a path closes another opens. Next is the number of buildings and items within them all stay the same after each dungeon shift. Houses can never transform into graveyards. Bricks from walls spiral clockwise regularly, and the nearby stone statues never move. Putting everything together, Chilchuk guides the gang towards the home they stayed in with Fallon. But Chilchuk remembers the pull of blood with something being dragged away from it, stressing that Leos and Marcel may want to continue searching if they think it may have been Fallon. The gang find it weird that the dragon's corpse had completely vanished, but when Leos heads to inspect a crack in the nearby wall, he suddenly falls back, spotting a zombie-like creature speaking to him. Marcel asks what Leos just saw, hearing that a monster told Leos that the magician's eye will be upon him. Right on cue, the sounds of the magician's summons can be heard nearby, forcing Marcel to stuff the gang into the nearby wall, managing to evade the creature's surveillance, only to emerge from the walls. Leos recognizes the gooey wall to house dungeon cleaners, small creatures that devour anything like rubble and excrete what they consume to patch up the dungeon. Continuing to follow Chilchuk, the gang successfully make it to some stairs, all preparing to feast on another meal, all whilst Marcel dons her frog suit. Senshi starts by mincing the cockatrice meat, all while stir-frying it with some dried leaves, finally adding the mixture to some grains and topping the item with some egg sauce. The gang are impressed by Senshi's brick-baked meal, But Laos realizes the bricks that are holding the meal are made from dungeon cleaners, swiftly trying the brick itself only to be disgusted. As the gang eats, we see Shuro's party suddenly appear, all tying up and preparing to slay Laos and his party. But luckily Shuro orders his party to stand down. Laos is glad to see Shuro again, starting off by introducing Shuro to Senshi. But before Laos can continue eating, he notices Shuro has quite a large group. Speechless, Kabru takes the chance to introduce himself to Laos. But as Laos and the others talk, Kabru continues to monitor Laos. Rin asks why Kabru didn't confront Laos about stealing from their party. But glaring at Rin, Kabru says Laos doesn't seem like a bad guy, plus Kabru is curious to learn from Laos along with any of his future plans. Laos tells Shuro about how they were trapped in their current floor, but thanks to Chilchuk's keen senses, they made it to their current location. But Chilchuk takes the chance to tease Shuro for the abundance of girls in his party. Shuro reassures everyone that the girls are his retainers, apologizing for leaving the party after Fallon helped him escape, but Shuro had to rally together a stronger team before he was comfortable with slaying the Red Dragon. Luckily, Marcel declares that their four-man team was able to slay the Red Dragon, piquing everyone's interest as Shuro himself asks about Fallon. But suddenly Shuro collapses to the ground exhausted. Maizuru begs Shuro to eat, revealing that Shuro hasn't slept or eaten in days. But Laos finally steps in, promising to tell Shuro everything if he eats and sleeps, convincing Shuro to finally ask for his first meal in a while. Immediately, Maizuru orders Inyatade to fetch some water whilst Hein and Benikadori cook some rice. As for Asabi, she is tasked with guarding Shuro. Seeing so many people gathered, Laos advises that they split up, prompting Maizuru to task Rin, Home, and Marcel with erecting a barrier to protect their current location. As for Laos and Kabru, they help take Shuro elsewhere to rest and eat. As the others help with starting a fire, Laos is seen explaining their encounter with the lunatic mage after slaying the Red Dragon after reviving Fallon only for her to be kidnapped. But Kabru asks to know how they escaped the magician. Laos chooses to conceal Marcel's black magic, instead explaining that they've been dining on the monsters they've slain, something Kabru finds hilarious. Shuro asks if Laos knows where Fallon could be, wondering if the orcs may be involved, but Laos reassures everyone that the orcs are working with them. When Laos utters that Fallon may have been taken to a deeper floor, he asks to speak alone with Shuro. But as Asabi guides Kabru elsewhere, we see Senshi and Maizuru discuss the importance of a well-balanced meal. Maizuru reveals that she would always cook for Shuro when he was younger, but one day Shuro had begged Maizuru to help him retrieve Fallon. A first for the young master, plus it was a northern girl that Shuro was obsessed with. Maizuru wonders how she can convince Shuro to move on from Fallon. But seeing as she must serve Shuro, Maizuru says she'll put her full efforts into ensuring Shuro is happy. Having created a standard Eastern meal, Senshi and Maizuru rush over to serve Shuro the meal. But upon entering the room, we see Shuro choking out Laos. Maizuru demands to know what happened, only for Asabi to utter that Laos had used black magic to revive Fallon, something Shuro cries is illegal. Shuro says Fallon will surely be captured and tortured, plus the elf from the west may also intervene, but Laos states it was the only way to bring Fallon back, something that makes Shuro draw his sword. As Shuro quivers at the crime Laos had committed, we pan out to see Fallon observing the gang's gathering, now housing a monstrous half-human body, all whilst promising she'll find Lord Delgal. The attacker demands the boys drop their weapons, but getting a closer look, Chilchuk realizes the attacker is Asabi, one of Shuro's retainers. Asabi demands that Marcel free her using her black magic, but Marcel doesn't know what Asabi is talking about, learning that Asabi has a curse around her neck whilst the second curse is keeping her as a Beastman. Chilchuk knows that Beastman can be genetically engineered and are normally created with the use of black magic and involve mixing the souls of a human and beast. Marcel starts by inspecting the curse and Asabi's neck, hearing that the curse may harm Asabi if Maizuru herself doesn't refresh the cooldown. But as Marcel works on dispelling the Eastern curse, Asabi demands to be fed. Spotting some leftover rations, Asabi scoffs down the item, only to begin choking on the meal, prompting Senshi to promise to make a warm drink for her. Senshi gets to work cooking some garlic, rice, and mushrooms. Saddened to see this is all he can make, but luckily he has cheese to finish up the risotto. At first, Asabi refuses to eat such a meal, but upon catching a whiff of the scrumptious food, Asabi scoffs down the meal like a child. The gang can't help but notice how sporadic Asabi is eating, but upon seeing Asabi being picky and tossing away some mushrooms, Senshi gets pissed, ordering Asabi to treat her food with respect and eat what she threw away. With Asabi refusing, Asabi's neck curse suddenly gives rise to a monstrous entity that stabs at Asabi. Luckily, Senshi tackles Asabi to safety, fixated on teaching Asabi proper table manners. But seeing the entity approaching Senshi from behind, Laos rushes to cut it down. Magically, Laos misses the target, crying out for Senshi to be careful. But inspecting the creature, Senshi identifies the entity to be holding a delicate meat carving knife. As Senshi retrieves his pot, he manages to block the entity's strike, ultimately shattering its delicate blade. Following up, Senshi manages to pin the creature to a wall, allowing Laos to set the creature on fire. Asabi is surprised Laos and his party is so caring for her, choosing to reveal that she's been searching all her life for someone to help break her curses. But Marcel sadly informs Asabi that she has no idea of how she can separate Asabi from the beast soul within her. Marcel likens it to Asabi's body being the shell of an egg, and her human and beast souls are yolks and egg white that have been mixed together, something Marcel has no way of separating. Asabi demands to know why Laos and his party are chasing after Fallon then, hearing that Laos isn't too sure himself as he plans on at least reaching Fallon and stopping her from attacking others. Plus, they can't return to the surface, seeing as they'll be restrained for using black magic. Asabi begins to despair, seeing as her cursed beast body can never be fixed. But the gang does reassure Asabi that once they confront the Lord of the Dungeon, they may be able to fix both Fallon and Asabi all together. Seeing as the gang is recruiting her, Asabi asks to be called Izutsumi. That night, Laos dreams of his parents ordering him to leave his adventuring duties behind, reminding Laos that he'll always be a failure having already dropped out of school and the army. Plus, the voices in his head remind Laos that he is quite gullible. Flashing back, we see Marcel offer to stand guard whilst the others sleep, but seeing as she's exhausted, Laos forces Marcel to head to bed. Instantly, Marcel falls asleep, but the gang are worried seeing her painful grunts whilst sleeping. Laos recognizes the pain to be because of a nightmare, a phenomenon that haunts people sleeping and can even cause death. And seeing as you shouldn't wake people when they're experiencing a nightmare, Laos reasons he should delve into Marcel's dream and wake her up. Using Marcel as a pillow, we cut back into Laos's dream where he manages to fight off the negative voices in his head, only to transform and begin digging into Marcel's dream. Flung into a strange-looking library, Laos hears a younger Marcel calling out to him, but when Laos tries waking Marcel up, a tremor can be felt. Immediately, Marcel and Laos flee, all whilst Marcel utter that her papa and Pippi had been eaten by a monster. Although being chased in a dream is quite common, Laos remembers a time when Fallon helped free Shuro from his nightmare, telling Laos that shielding the dreamer from their past trauma and scars is what frees them from their nightmare. Laos declares he'll slay the creature chasing them, but getting a peek at the monstrosity chasing them, our duo flee for dear life, both confused as to what the creature is. Seeing Marcel cower in fear, Laos reassures Marcel they'll defeat the creature, but racking his brain for the classification of the monster they're facing, Laos realizes the monster must be a worm from the dragon family. As Laos lists off the features of the worm, Marcel signals to Laos that the monster is caught up to them, both barely escaping the grasp of the monster, but having been grazed by the monster, Laos's face begins to deform. At the same time, the surrounding area begins to morph and bend, a result of the dreamer feeling more anxious and scared. Laos fears what will happen if he passes away in someone else's dream, putting on a smile only to remind Marcel that she can use magic to attack the creature. Marcel begins hugging her doll more tightly, uttering that she had tried using magic, but it failed, something that makes Leos realize that Marcel is feeling guilty for Fallon's transformation, and Marcel's nightmare revolves around her fear of death. Leos states that running away will do them no good, instead dragging Marcel towards the monster only to reassure Marcel that Fallon can be resurrected countless times in the dungeon. Strangely enough, the monster tries sucking only Leos in, but Marcel manages to save him, both continuing to flee from the monster. Leos wonders if his morph face is due to him suddenly aging sporadically. But suddenly Leos hears Marcel cry that during her papa's funeral, her mother had told Marcel that she runs faster than others, and that the reason the people around her pass before she does. Leos learns that Pippi is Marcel's pet bird, and that Marcel is actually afraid of others passing away and leaving her alone. But as the creature appears, Leos cries for Marcel to believe in herself. As the creature drags Leos away, he reminds Marcel she is capable of amazing things, ultimately giving Marcel the courage to manifest a spell book that finally eradicates the creature. As both Leos and Marcel awaken from their nightmare, Leos reveals that there were nightmare monsters hidden in Marcel's. Not too long after, the gang stumble onto some bloodied stairs, signs that Fallon must have squeezed down the stairs before them. Reaching floor 6, the level is known to have many tunnels dug by ancient dwarves, all intricate and endless, but seeing the snow brushing past them, Leos says something is off, seeing as the 6th floor is meant to be hot and humid. Chilchuck says he definitely recognizes their path, seeing as the red dragon wiped them out on the 6th floor, and the change in temperature may be due to the shifting dungeon. Leos says it is hard to follow Fallon's bloodied tracks with the snow covering it, but the gang reason they should head to where they were wiped out in hopes of retrieving their belongings. Chilchuck demands to know what Leos plans to do with the Mad Magician. Hearing as Leos mentions the name Lord Delgal, the person the Red Dragon is seemingly searching for. Marcel recognizes Lord Delgal to be the last king of the Golden City that fell a millennium ago, and a lot of the loot found has inscriptions of him, all praising him. Chilchuck realizes that when the dungeon was first discovered, it was Delgal, the old man, who appeared before them only to vanish into dust, making the Mad Magician's search for Delgal impossible, seeing as he has vanished. Leos suspects the Mad Magician is simply protecting the king they were assigned to serve, but when the gang hear that Leos had already encountered the same elf in the paintings, the gang cry Leos should have told them sooner. Marcel says it's unique for an elf to live over 1,000 years, since the average lifespan of an elf is around 500, and there is no magic in the world that can extend one's lifespan. Leos says they can maybe show that they aren't enemies of Delgal nor the magician. But as the gang continue along the tunnel, they're all struck by harrowing cold winds. Fearing they'll get separated, the gang all decide to hold onto each other, barely managing to make it to a nearby shelter. Drowned in darkness, Marcel lights up their surroundings, but surprisingly, there seems to be a few extra party members. Inspecting the members, Leos says there are shapeshifters amongst them, normal encounters when Leos was working his hometown. Although the creatures aren't immediately violent, they tend to devour the original copy and take their place, frightening everyone. Luckily, Leos's clones are clearly incoherent and non-realistic, a feature of the shapeshifters as they can read memories and morph based on how other people expect them to be. The gang first rule out a masculine-looking Marcel, only to pick out a copy of Chilchuck and Senshi based on their irregular clothing, ultimately locking up a portion of the copies. Leos knows that attacking the remaining copies will end in a brawl, so the gang continue sifting through the copies, first demanding that Marcel's copies show off their magic books. Luckily, the gang are able to apply the same technique to remove one of each copy, leaving only pairs for Marcel, Senshi, and Chilchuck. Unable to pick out the fakes, Leos reasons they should all cook up a meal, but the gang fear that Leos still won't be able to figure it out. With the pairs all ordered to create their own meals, Leos starts by observing Chilchuck's sitting habits. But when Chilchuck asks for help with opening a jar, Chilchuck cries that the real Chilchuck would never do such a thing. As Leos notes down the Chilchuk's behaviors, he moves on to Marcel, only to observe Marcel be complaining as usual, whilst Marcel seems cool, calm, and collected. Finally, Leos finds it hard to distinguish the Senshis, seeing as they're both masters at cooking. But Leos does note how cool-looking one of the Senshis are. With the meal being served, Leos admits he has no idea who is real and fake, but relying on his intuition, Leos ends up picking out his party from the clones. Immediately, the pairs begin to bicker and argue, but Leos reasons that shapeshifters must be carnivores or omnivores since they eat humans, plus the shapeshifters shouldn't be able to cook. Seeing as the shapeshifters reside in locations with low visibility and only target the weak, Leos deduces that a greater enemy is waiting for them to tire themselves out. But seeing no other choice, Leos prepares to reveal his trump card. Getting on his hands and knees, Leos begins to howl and bark at the enemy ahead, channeling his experience playing with dogs to threaten the creature in the shadows. But suddenly, the shapeshifters disperse as the beast in the shadow appears before our gang. Knowing that the first to flinch is the loser, both Leos and the beast rush each other. But funnily enough, Marcel blows up the monster with a single spell. When the gang checks on Leos, they also notice the meals they made have all turned into leaves, forcing the gang to whip up another meal. The gang take the chance to praise Leos from being able to discern them from the shapeshifters, all sharing a meal only for Senshi to realize that their items they had been gifted from Shuro have been stolen. Following some grain tracks, the gang stumble onto an empty cell with their provisions. But turning around, they notice an attacker has captured Marcel and is demanding to have a chat. The attacker demands the boys drop their weapons, but getting a closer look, Chilchuk realizes the attacker is Asabi, one of Shuro's retainers. Asabi demands that Marcel free her using her black magic, but Marcel doesn't know what Asabi is talking about, learning that Asabi has a curse around her neck whilst the second curse is keeping her as a beastman. Chilchuk knows that beastman can be genetically engineered and are normally created with the use of black magic and involve mixing the souls of a human and beast. Marcel starts by inspecting the curse and Asabi's neck, hearing that the curse may harm Asabi if Maizuru herself doesn't refresh the cooldown. But as Marcel works on dispelling the Eastern curse, Asabi demands to be fed. Spotting some leftover rations, Asabi scoffs down the item, only to begin choking on the meal, prompting Senshi to promise to make a warm drink for her. Senshi gets to work cooking some garlic, rice, and mushrooms. Saddened to see this is all he can make, but luckily he has cheese to finish up the risotto. At first, Asabi refuses to eat such a meal, but upon catching a whiff of the scrumptious food, Asabi scoffs down the meal like a child. The gang can't help but notice how sporadic Asabi is eating. But upon seeing Asabi being picky and tossing away some mushrooms, Senshi gets pissed, ordering Asabi to treat her food with respect and eat what she threw away. With Asabi refusing, Asabi's neck curse suddenly gives rise to a monstrous entity that stabs at Asabi. Luckily, Senshi tackles Asabi to safety, fixated on teaching Asabi proper table manners. But seeing the entity approaching Senshi from behind, Leos rushes to cut it down. Magically, Leos misses the target, crying out for Senshi to be careful. But inspecting the creature, Senshi identifies the entity to be holding a delicate meat carving knife. As Senshi retrieves his pot, he manages to block the entity's strike, ultimately shattering its delicate blade. Following up, Senshi manages to pin the creature to a wall, allowing Leos to set the creature on fire. Asabi is surprised Leos and his party is so caring for her, choosing to reveal that she's been searching all her life for someone to help break her curses. But Marcel sadly informs Asabi that she has no idea of how she can separate Asabi from the beast soul within her. Marcel likens it to Asabi's body being the shell of an egg, and her human and beast souls are yolks and egg white that have been mixed together, something Marcel has no way of separating. Asabi demands to know why Leos and his party are chasing after Fallon then, hearing that Leos isn't too sure himself as he plans on at least reaching Fallon and stopping her from attacking others. Plus, they can't return to the surface, seeing as they'll be restrained for using black magic. Asabi begins to despair, seeing as her cursed beast body can never be fixed. But the gang does reassure Asabi that once they confront the Lord of the Dungeon, they may be able to fix both Fallon and Asabi altogether. Seeing as the gang is recruiting her, Asabi asks to be called Izutsumi. That night, Leos dreams of his parents ordering him to leave his adventuring duties behind, reminding Leos that he'll always be a failure having already dropped out of school and the army. Plus, the voices in his head remind Leos that he is quite gullible. Flashing back, we see Marcel offer to stand guard whilst the others sleep, but seeing as she's exhausted, Leos forces Marcel to head to bed. Instantly, Marcel falls asleep, but the gang are worried seeing her painful grunts whilst sleeping. Leos recognizes the pain to be because of a nightmare, a phenomenon that haunts people sleeping and can even cause death. And seeing as you shouldn't wake people when they're experiencing a nightmare, Leos reasons he should delve into Marcel's dream and wake her up. Using Marcel as a pillow, we cut back into Leos's dream where he manages to fight off the negative voices in his head, only to transform and begin digging into Marcel's dream. Flung into a strange-looking library, Leos hears a younger Marcel calling out to him. But when Leos tries waking Marcel up, a tremor can be felt. Immediately, Marcel and Leos flee, all whilst Marcel utters that her papa and Pippi had been eaten by a monster. Although being chased in a dream is quite common, Leos remembers a time when Fallon helped free Shuro from his nightmare, telling Leos that shielding the dreamer from their past trauma and scars is what frees them from their nightmare. Leos declares he'll slay the creature chasing them, but getting a peek at the monstrosity chasing them, our duo flee for dear life, both confused as to what the creature is. Seeing Marcel cower in fear, Leos reassures Marcel they'll defeat the creature, but racking his brain for the classification of the monster they're facing, Leos realizes the monster must be a worm from the dragon family. As Leos lists off the features of the worm, Marcel signals to Leos that the monster has caught up to them, both barely escaping the grasp of the monster, but having been grazed by the monster, Leos's face begins to deform. At the same time, the surrounding area begins to morph and bend, a result of the dreamer feeling more anxious and scared. Leos fears what will happen if he passes away in someone else's dream, putting on a smile only to remind Marcel that she can use magic to attack the creature. Marcel begins hugging her doll more tightly, uttering that she had tried using magic, but it failed, something that makes Leos realize that Marcel is feeling guilty for Fallon's transformation, and Marcel's nightmare revolves around her fear of death. Leos states that running away will do them no good, instead dragging Marcel towards the monster only to reassure Marcel that Fallon can be resurrected countless times in the dungeon. Strangely enough, the monster tries sucking only Leos in, but Marcel manages to save him, both continuing to flee from the monster. Leos wonders if his morph face is due to him suddenly aging sporadically, but suddenly Leos hears Marcel cry that during her papa's funeral, her mother had told Marcel that she runs faster than others and that the reason the people around her pass before she does. Leos learns that Pippi is Marcel's pet bird and that Marcel is actually afraid of others passing away and leaving her alone. But as the creature appears, Leos cries for Marcel to believe in herself. As the creature drags Leos away, he reminds Marcel she is capable of amazing things, ultimately giving Marcel the courage to manifest a spell book that finally eradicates the creature. As both Leos and Marcel awaken from their nightmare, Leos reveals that there were nightmare monsters hidden in Marcel's pillow. Leos gets to work cleaning the nightmares off, uttering that they're known as Shun, creatures related to dragons. Steaming and seasoning the nightmares, the gang indulge in their plump taste, all whilst watching the nightmares project the memories of Marcel's dream. Heading through a narrow passage, the gang squeeze through a tight gap, ultimately falling into the pit where they fought the red dragon. With the place frozen over, Marcel utters that it was believed the pit was the deepest in the dungeon, but recently a magic door had been discovered. In their last expedition, the gang had started to sketch out the door for the Lord of the Island, but it was their encounter with the red dragon guarding the door that put everything into motion. getting to work searching for their lost gear. The gang notices a decent amount of it has been ransacked, but luckily Marcel's sleeping bag and Leos's clothes aren't touched. As for their food, it seems to have been eaten, but seeing as other things have been untouched, Chilchuk reasons that only monsters have visited their location. Seeing Marcel sneezing, the gang start to set up camp, but off to the side we see Izutsumi pocketing some loot. Luckily, Chilchuk orders Izutsumi to return what she just stole, scolding her for stealing, but Izutsumi fires back by stating Chilchuk's kind have stories of their legs being lobbed off for stealing. Marcel tries calming the duo down, only to be called to inspect an ice ball that seems to have frozen fish in them. Marcel reasons it's the perfect chance to teach Leos how to draw a magic circle. Happy to hear Leos is getting used to his magic fatigue, but his hallucinations are getting worse. Marcel recognizes the fish to reside from the fourth floors, believing a current must have washed them and froze them in their current location, but Marcel puts Leos to work having him help draw up the magic circle. With the circle complete, Marcel infuses her magic into the circle, creating a massive rupture onto the ice ball, but the ice ball is revealed to be an ice golem in disguise. Funnily enough, Senshi remembers accidentally losing one of his totems, reasoning it must have been washed away and gave birth to the golem before them. As the golem roars, the icicles in the ceiling begin to shatter, all falling towards the gang, but Leos chooses to tank several of them to protect Marcel. As the golem prepares to smash Leos, Izutsumi draws its attention, hearing that they need to break its core to destroy the golem. With Izutsumi keeping the golem distracted, Chilchuk scans the golem from afar, but Izutsumi seems to have gotten stuck in the snow, suddenly mauled by the golem. Luckily, Izutsumi escapes unharmed, watching as Chilchuk fires an arrow at the golem's head, but as Izutsumi checks where the arrow landed, she realizes the golem's core is in its forehead. Seeing as Chilchuk is useless in battle, Izutsumi has no choice but to slay the golem herself, making use of her quick footwork along with an extra arrow to pierce the golem's core, ultimately destroying the creature. The gang are amazed by Izutsumi's strength, but seeing Izutsumi sneezing, they all rush into a cave, starting a fire only for Marcel to order everyone to change out of their wet clothes. Marcel offers to cover Izutsumi with a blanket, but Izutsumi reassures everyone she has nothing to show, nonchalantly changing out of her wet clothing, but Marcel still rushes to cover Izutsumi up. Seeing as it's getting warmer, Senshi tries thawing out a frozen fish, accidentally steaming up the room, but this inspires the gang to sweat it out in their makeshift sauna. Senshi starts to stew the fish to create a broth, adding diced mushrooms and nightmare to enhance the stew, only to top it off with some harpy's egg. With Senshi steaming their egg concoction, he quickly stops Izutsumi from eating first, asking everyone to gather only to finally serve up his grilled fish and steamed egg dish. As the gang feast on the meal, Chilchuk hands Izutsumi her newly patched bag, apologizing for insulting her earlier, and asks that Izutsumi get more comfortable around their party. Seeing everyone so jolly, Izutsumi wonders what this strange warm feeling inside of her. Cutting to after the meal, where Marcel helps Izutsumi try on some new clothes, revealing Izutsumi's new adorable form, having borrowed some AnimeSummaries clothing. As the gang munch on some sweet boiled mandrakes, Izutsumi is seen handing her mandrake over to Leos, refusing to eat it. Leos orders Izutsumi to at least have one bite, but clawing at Leos, Izutsumi says she doesn't like eating monsters, fearing that they'll pass down strange diseases. Marcel sympathizes with Izutsumi's thinking, but Marcel admits that she's been surprised by the taste of most monsters, asking what Izutsumi would do with food she didn't like in the past. Izutsumi remembers handing the food she disliked over to Inyatade, but as the gang continue through the strong, chilly winds, they choose to set up camp once more, seeing as the blizzard before them is picking up speed. The gang notice Senshi completely exhausted, reasoning they should try to cook something themselves, but when they go over their remaining resources, Leos reports they're low on essential food items. Izutsumi cries that she will only eat non-monstrous food items, but Leos states that monster food is just like eating cattle or vegetables, but refusing to hear Leos's yapping. Izutsumi suddenly notices a sheep growing from a tree. Leos says the plant before them is a barometz, quickly rushing after Izutsumi, who has already approached the plant, declaring that the plant tends to attract carnivores of all kinds. Stopping at a cave, Izutsumi and Leos spot dire wolves emerge from the cave, but as Leos draws his blade, Izutsumi leaves Leos to deal with the wolves himself, heading to explore a cave. Seeing Izutsumi running off, Marcel confronts Izutsumi, demanding to know what Izutsumi is doing, but Izutsumi is simply having the others make up for their lack of effort when fighting the ice golem earlier. Izutsumi knows she can return to the others by following the smell of fire in the wind, suddenly encountering a fork in their path, only to pick the left path based on her intuition. Marcel tries stopping Izutsumi, but Izutsumi wonders why Marcel still eats monsters when she clearly hates it, something Marcel struggles to explain, especially since the sounds of wolves can be heard behind them. Marcel wonders if she should use an explosion spell or a stun spell to deal with the wolves. But annoyed Izutsumi chooses to run off, suddenly hearing a massive explosion behind her. Flashing back, we see Heinz scolding Izutsumi for having Inutade clean snow from the roof. And due to Inutade's clumsiness, she fell from the roof and hurt herself. Izutsumi had asked Inutade why she cleaned the roof for her, but unable to remember their full conversation, Izutsumi simply continued along her path, suddenly caught off guard as a wolf had snuck up on her. Having been distracted, Izutsumi desperately fends for her life, but luckily Marcel arrives, casting a stun spell to blind the wolf, only for Izutsumi to finish off the creature with a broken arm. Marcel helps guide Izutsumi back through the cave, uttering that the reason she eats monsters is to ensure that she can ultimately reach her goals. Marcel knows that avoiding monsters entirely will ultimately slow down their progression through the dungeon, and it's ultimately up to them to make compromises to ensure they're ready for more serious issues. As the girls make it out of the cave, they hear that Leos was able to scare off the dire wolves. But first things first, Leos and Marcel help heal Izutsumi's broken arm. Seeing as the wolves made off with the riper barometz, the gang settle for an unripe one, cutting into the fruit only to spot a sheep hiding within it. Since she starts by harvesting the meat from the sheep, choosing to fry up the ribs only to combine the flesh of the fruit to create some barometz chops. Hesitating, Izutsumi eventually tastes the dish, realizing that the ribs taste more like crab meat. Izutsumi suddenly remembers the reason why Inutade had cleaned the roof in place of her, hearing that Inutade wanted to prove her usefulness to those who gave her a place to stay, advising Izutsumi herself to tackle hard things and grow from them instead of avoiding them all the time. The gang can't help but praise Izutsumi for conquering her fear of eating dungeon monsters, all receiving scratches from an annoyed Izutsumi as she calls out Marcel for not eating her meal. Following Kabru and Shuro's parties, they're all relieved to have made it back to the surface, prompting Shuro to ask Kabru to accompany and validate his story when he reports their findings to the lord of the island. Shuro says he won't mention Leos's party specifically, but suddenly Kabru rushes to check their nearby window, spotting a ship of Western elves known as the Canaries. Apparently, the Canaries show up when the dungeon level reaches a certain danger level, and elves are tasked with controlling the danger. But this stresses Kabru out, seeing as humans are like children when comparing the lifespans of elves and dwarves. As Shuro and Kabru head to speak with the lord of the land, they bump into Namari, Kiki, and Kaka, sad to report that the lord of the island is currently busy. Kabru refuses to allow the elves to take over the dungeon, revealing that his hometown used to thrive because of a dungeon, but when monsters began to spill out, elves had arrived to slay the monsters, accidentally slaying Kabru's mother and many others during the process. Refusing to be bullied around by the elves, Kabru chooses to interrupt the Lord's meeting with the elves, courageously asking if he can give a report on their recent findings. Seeing as the elves permit Kabru to speak, Kabru reveals they encountered a human-turned-monster. A creature Flecky knows must be a chimera. Ada says they should speed things up, prompting Patadol to order their forces to enter the island immediately, but Mr. Tansu is against elves invading their land. Sithis Offrey reminds Mr. Tansu that lives may be at stake, convincing the Lord to agree to listen to the elves, something Lishan praises the Lord for choosing. Kabru and Shuro notice the elves asking the Lord to sign over the dungeon to them, annoying Kabru as he had spent his entire life searching for competent party members to conquer the dungeon, but sadly most of them were corrupt and selfless. When Kabru had heard of Laos, he was intrigued by his character along with his strange party members, reasoning that Laos himself is the closest person they have that can rectify the ever-changing situation in the dungeon. Refusing to allow a repeat of elves slaying innocent lives, Kabru stops the Lord from signing over the dungeon, only to reveal he was the sole survivor of a dungeon expansion 15 years ago. The elves recognize Kabru to be the kid who originally lived in Ataya, and it was their vice commander that took Kabru in and nurtured Kabru for a few years. Kabru admits that due to his race, he was unable to capitalize on the kindness he was bestowed, putting on an act to get the elves' attention. But Mithrin speaks up, asking Kabru to get to the point. Kabru says that although the dungeon in Ataya was destroyed, the aftermath caused many undeads to slay many innocent lives along with elven soldiers, something Kabru fears is bound to happen if the elves attempt to destroy the dungeon. Kabru instead suggests they seal the dungeon, asking to be put in charge of evacuating the current adventures in the dungeon. But as the elves discuss such an idea, Mithrin agrees to put Kabru in charge, but they will be keeping a close eye on Kabru in case he has ulterior motives. Back with Laos and the gang, we see Senshi experimenting with different poaching methods for an egg, only to whip up some sauce using the egg yolk and oil, serving up some eggs Benedict for the gang. But as they scoff down the creamy eggs, Izutsumi is seen acting strange, having thought she had detected a presence nearby. Laos cries it may be that his hallucinations are real after all, revealing that at first the voices in his head were vague, but after it manifested more clearly, Laos had been trying to ignore it. Finally speaking with the voices, Laos says the ghost before them was the one that saved them from the magician's trap, but suddenly the ghost offers to show Laos something cool. With Laos accepting, the gang are suddenly pulled into a different realm by some ghostly hands, all waking up to see a magnificent palace before them. Running into a carriage driver, Laos tries explaining they came from a dungeon, but immediately the carriage driver gives them a ride into town, all noting how monsters in town are quite tamed. The carriage driver says outsiders should be careful, revealing that they'll be heading to the Golden Castle and that the ghost that brought them here is the castle's residence. But Laos hears they'll be meeting the castle's residents in a bit and that they were chosen. Stopping for a bit, the driver speaks with a villager, asking the gang to wait until their master arrives, but it seems the gang's arrival has drawn in a crowd. Laos chooses to inspect the monsters within the village, amazed to hear that the town milk minotaurs for cow's milk, something that amazes Laos. Senshi is more fixated on the town's agriculture, impressed to hear the village is replicating the ecosystem above ground. But as we cut to Marcel, we see her taking care of Izutsumi. Seeing the village girls offer to dress her up, Marcel accepts, only to be placed in some funky clothing. Chilchuk himself is seen trying out the town's booze, frightened to hear that the youthful-looking person before him had been brewing alcohol for 600 years. As the boys unite to explain their findings of the amazing features of the town, they suddenly notice Marcel and Izutsumi all dressed up, something that embarrasses Marcel. Laos wonders why Izutsumi is acting so childish. Something Marcel suspects is due to the barrier around the town that suppresses aggression in monsters and indirectly Izutsumi's half-monster self. Marcel is annoyed she can't decipher the barrier's spell, admitting she would have loved to stay in the town forever, but just then the gang are called to meet the town's master. Introducing himself as Yad Malini, the grandson of Lord Delgal, but before Yad explains the reason the gang were summoned, he serves up a feast for the gang. The gang hear that the town don't normally eat monsters, nor do they eat at all, revealing that the mad magician had placed the curse of immortality on them, and therefore they no longer feel hunger. Yad admits he was never able to figure out why the magician had cursed them, having barely remembered his grandfather blaming himself for being the reason the magician turned to black magic in the first place. And eventually Delgal sought out help from people on the surface, never returning. Yad is relieved that his grandfather was able to make it to the surface before passing away, but apparently other villagers had tried to leave as well, but due to their immortal bodies, their flesh was ripped away from them, leaving them to wander around in the dungeon in their ghost-like form. Marcel asks why they were summoned, learning that Yad and his village believe in the prophecy of a person wielding a winged sword that will slay the mad magician and free the townsfolk from their immortal curse. Leos does agree that his sword has wings, but seeing that there is also a lion face on his sword's hilt, Yad reveals that the winged lion is the guardian deity of their village. Apparently, the winged lion had been chained up by the mad magician, but the villagers are still able to read the lion's prophecies when they dream, and is the reason why Delgal left for the surface to begin with. Yad chooses to reveal the entirety of the prophecy, stating that the person wielding the winged sword will slay the mad magician and claim the dungeon for themselves, personally asking if Leos can fulfill the prophecy and set them all free. That night, Leos feels bad for agreeing to free the villagers, wondering why Kinsuk had sprouted a lion head out of nowhere. Senshi mentions how the food they were served was quite bland, stating that it was strange that people who don't eat tend to their fields and regularly clean. Something Senshi suspects is to keep them sane and human. As the gang head to bed, Senshi reminds Leos of what he promised to Zon the Orc Chief, asking Leos to really consider his future, especially since Yad's touch was depressingly cold. The next morning, Leos awakens and smells something sweet, choosing to investigate the source of the scent only to spot Senshi flipping pancakes and entertaining Yad. As the gang sit down for breakfast, Yad admires the gang's appetite, but when offered a taste himself, Yad can only comment on the pancakes' soft and warm textures. Yad reveals that in the past he would sit at the table with his grandfather and his parents, and Thistle the lunatic mage would always be by Delgal's side. Apparently, Yad's great-grandfather had welcomed Thistle as a jester, and over time, Thistle became like a brother to Delgal, but when Delgal ascended the throne, Thistle began to study magic. Since the kingdom had many relics left behind by the dwarves and elves, it was natural that Thistle discovered black magic, and eventually Thistle's thirst for knowledge consumed him, leading to immortality spells being cast upon their kingdom. Leos wants to speak with Thistle and understand his motives, but Yad warns against it, as Thistle is quite strict with who he talks to, and has slain people who even tried helping Delgal escape their town. At the same time, we see some of Thistle's summons scanning the village, all whilst Yad orders Leos to keep contact with Thistle to a minimum. Yad instead suggests the gang try and speak with the winged lion, as it will be their best bet at defeating Thistle, only to lead the gang towards an exit in their kingdom that reattaches to the dungeon. With the townsfolk handing the gang some supplies, the gang are escorted away by some ghost, but as the gang leave, Thistle suddenly appears demanding to know who he was talking to just now. Falling through space, the gang appear in a strange location, a place Leos recognizes as a reservoir crafted by ancient dwarves. Chilchuk says his compass isn't working, plus Senshi seems to be sick, but as the gang chat about their next course of action, we see Izutsumi returning back to her normal self. As Leos and Marcel scope out the area, Senshi asks if Chilchuk can see the markings on the pillar next to them, only to request Chilchuk to replicate the symbols onto the surrounding pillars, as this will help them determine their location. Getting to work, Chilchuk helps Senshi figure out they're somewhere southeast, but just then Leos and Marcel return to the group, crying that they've found tracks resembling Fallon's. Leos does admit it could have just been a griffin, a creature with a lower body of a lion and an upper body of a bird, but hearing the news, Senshi begins to quiver. The gang declare they'll prepare to track down the creature, but Senshi states he can't, trying to come up with an excuse, but the gang aren't listening. At that moment, the griffin attacks from above, barely missing the gang, but seeing the creature up and close, Leos is amazed. Annoyed, Marcel prepares to shoot the creature out of the skies, but Senshi strangely begins to flee the scene, ultimately attracting the griffin's attention. Running for dear life, Senshi wounds up getting snatched by the griffin, horrifying the gang as Senshi is quite defenseless. Leos begins to have a mental breakdown, especially since the griffin could have taken Senshi anywhere, but luckily Marcel says she'll summon familiars to help look for Senshi. Marcel explains there are 3 types of summoning magic: the first being the domination of existing monsters. But this process is complex and could alert Thistle to their location. The second is altering existing plants and animals into monsters. And finally is the creation of a monster from scratch. Laos fears that such a thing sounds complex, but Marcel says it is if they were summoning an autonomous creature, but for their case, a mobile one will do. With Marcel preparing the magic circle, Marcel asks Laos to retrieve all the food they have, only to ask if Marcel can teach him what she's doing. Marcel immediately refuses, prompting Izutsumi to ask who Senshi is and how the gang met him, but the gang admit they don't know too much about Senshi. Chilchuk did find it weird that Senshi had been studying monster food for over 10 years, but the dungeon was only discovered 6 years ago. Plus, Senshi has rare equipment, can read ancient dwarven code, and fears a griffin from an unknown floor. Chilchuk fears Senshi is hiding something sinister, but Laos calms Chilchuk down, stating that they'll all clear things up once Senshi is rescued. As Marcel wraps up her preparations, she begins to channel her magic into the magic circle, finishing up the spell only to unveil her summons. Surprisingly, 3 adorable-looking creatures have been summoned, something that disappoints Laos. When Marcel asks one of her summons to fly around, she suddenly realizes her summon's vision is being projected into her mind, quickly having her eyes covered only to appreciate Thistle, who is capable of controlling multiple summons at once. Seeing as Marcel will be using her summon's vision to scan the area, Laos says he'll carry Marcel's body around. But not too long later, Marcel uncovers Senshi pinned high up on a pillar. Marcel's summon tries tugging at Senshi, but it seems he's been bound pretty tightly, suddenly swiped out of the air as the griffin has spotted Marcel's summon. Having lost her vision from the skies, Marcel fears that facing off against a griffin will be impossible, especially since the creature's stats and capabilities exceed most monsters. Marcel asks for Laos's advice to overcome the griffin, watching as Laos begins to shape her second summon, declaring that the summon will need a sharp body to help with agility, just like Thistle's wyvern summons. Upon releasing her new summon, Marcel states she feels an immediate difference, asking everyone to prepare to rescue Senshi as she'll try to keep the griffin distracted. Marcel firsthand delivers a rope to Senshi, only to barely dodge the grasp of the griffin's claws, slowly drawing it away from Senshi. When Marcel tries to outsmart it, the griffin manages to read the summon's movements, instantly kicking it out of the skies. Marcel wonders what they can do to outsmart the griffin, all watching as Laos gets to work reshaping their third summon. But Marcel stops Laos, instead putting her own twist on the summon's design. Fixated on solely rescuing Senshi, Marcel comes up with the sky fish, sending it blitzing through the air, all while Senshi tries climbing the rope to escape. Having drawn the griffin's attention once more, Marcel realizes her summon can't change directions. But as Marcel speeds up even further, she manages to puncture a hole in one of the griffin's wings. As the creature falls from the skies, Laos rushes to capitalize on its opening, plunging his sword deep into Griffin and managing to slay it. With Senshi safe, Marcel thanks her sky fish for all it's done, only to be horrified to see Laos dissect her summon for their upcoming meal. Off to the side, Senshi is seen quite depressed, but as Chilchuk goes to check on Senshi, we see Laos nonchalantly preparing the sky fish. Laos first chops the sky fish into sections only to remove their wings, battering both the fish and its wings to create a fried meal for everybody. With the gang digging in, Laos asks Senshi to have some as well, but Laos notices Senshi eyeing the griffin's corpse, asking what's on his mind. Seeing Senshi acting strange, Chilchuk chooses to reveal more about his life, telling Senshi about how he grew up northeast from their town and how he has spent around 10 years exploring dungeons, picking locks, and appraising them. Chilchuk does also mention how he has a wife and daughters, but apparently doesn't see them often. Having told Senshi about himself, Chilchuk asks to know more about Senshi, all listening in as Senshi says his full name is Senshi of Isganda, and he originally belonged to a small mining crew that sought relics from before the war. One day, Senshi's gang had uncovered something massive, a golden castle that eventually became the dungeon they're currently in. Gillen was surprised the myth about the fallen kingdom was true, but as Nor confirms the structure before them to be completely gold, Bregon and the others all prepare to enter the golden castle. A younger Senshi had asked if they should resurface and stock up before exploring the golden castle, but Toten and Invar scolds Senshi for being so wimpy, annoying Senshi as he suppresses his worries only to enter the castle with the others. Strangely enough, Senshi saw his party begin to act strange, all being drawn to explore the dungeon further, but out of nowhere, Toten collapses, having been attacked by a bird-like monster. With the dwarves realizing that the castle is part of the dungeon, they quickly search for a way out, having lost their way back. Strangely enough, the dungeon would have water sources and sleeping areas for the dwarves to rest and refuel, even housing monsters that resembled gorgeous-looking women. When their food supply ran out, Gillen said they needed to begin hunting to survive, ordering Invar and Bregon to ready their shields. Nor and Gillen will fend off the Sauron monsters, all while Senshi is tasked with mapping out the surrounding area. As Senshi watches his four-man party head off to hunt for food, not too long after he horrifically learns of Nor's death, as it was the same massive bird monster that claimed his life. Senshi had offered to help find more food, but Gillen states Senshi would only slow them down, still fed an equal amount of food as the others, even though Senshi didn't do anything. Senshi felt pathetic, watching as Invar himself was also slain, forcing the party to slaughter their horse to stay alive. Gillen says the monster they're facing is called a griffin, a creature that seems to like toying with its prey, but seeing Senshi scared, Gillen reassures Senshi they'll come up on top. With Gillen continuing to feed Senshi equal portion sizes of food, we cut to later that night, when Senshi is awoken by Bregon arguing with Gillen, demanding Gillen stop feeding Senshi, seeing as he's useless. Gillen holds strong, stating that he'll continue to treat Senshi equally, something that forces Bregon to storm away. As time passes by, the trio rot away in their room, something that makes Senshi wonder if he can eat rocks to survive, but having gone mad, Bregon begins accusing Senshi of hiding food. Luckily, Gillen had pulled Bregon outside, both beginning to shout at each other only for loud noise and a scream to be heard from outside. A few minutes pass, and Gillen returns alone, unable to look Senshi in the eyes as he says he had slain the griffin, but it seems the griffin slayed Bregon. Senshi had seen a massive dent in Gillen's head, remaining in the room as Gillen headed back outside to harvest the so-called griffin, choosing to boil the unknown meat in a stew. Although the meal smelt bad, Senshi ended up devouring the meat since he was starving, but out of nowhere Gillen left the room only to never return. Left alone, Senshi was too scared to leave the room, instead studying the maps he had sketched and realized there was a pattern etched on the walls. Finally building up the courage, Senshi had left the room only to discover the belongings of his party members, but no corpses, choosing to continue on his journey, but was eventually captured by orcs. Senshi had decided to befriend the orcs and teach them ancient Dwarvish. In exchange, the orcs showed Senshi how to pick out mushrooms and deal with various monsters. As time passed, Senshi eventually emerged from the dungeon, completely guilt-ridden as he was the sole survivor from his mining squad. So Senshi refused to return home, instead staying around the dungeon along with making a home around the upper floors of the dungeon. It was then when Senshi discovered Laos and the others. But the thing that haunts Senshi the most is the meat Gillen fed him before he disappeared, something Senshi fears wasn't actually griffin meat to begin with. Hearing such a harrowing tale, Laos suggests that Senshi come to terms with his past and taste the griffin they slayed, something Senshi agrees is best for him. Laos says they'll taste both upper and lower parts of the griffin and prepare it the same way Senshi had eaten it in his past, all watching as Laos begins harvesting the griffin's flesh. Laos found it weird that a carnivore like the griffin didn't eat Senshi's party after hunting them, nor did the griffin attack the horse Senshi's party had. As Laos begins slicing up the griffin's flesh, he also reasons that the dent on Gillen's head was blunt, so it couldn't have been done by a griffin's sharp claws. Laos wonders what other flying creature could deal a blunt blow, but seeing as the water is boiling, Laos prepares to dump the bland meat into the water. Sadly, Laos gets distracted by some mushrooms nearby, leaving Senshi to conquer his fears as he boils the griffin meat only to dine on the meal. Bracing himself, Senshi tastes the meat, only to realize that the meat he had prior did not belong to a griffin. The gang scolds Laos for confirming Senshi's worst fears, but Laos reassures everyone that Senshi didn't end up eating his party member and it was actually a hippogriff that Gillen slayed. This also explains why the dwarves' bodies were never eaten, as hippogriffs favor eating horses, and is the reason why the dwarves were targeted in the first place. Plus, hippogriffs have hooves that can create a blunt indent on metal objects easily. Senshi is grateful, yet skeptical that Laos believes it wasn't his friends that he had to eat that day. But Laos reassures Senshi they can confirm the theory, suddenly declaring that they already have a hippogriff in front of them. Laos states that a griffin shouldn't exist in this dungeon to begin with, quickly pointing to the mushrooms he was inspecting as he declares them to be changelings. Laos says the legend of changeling children originates from Chilchuk's hometown, and it involves children wandering off into a forest only to be replaced by identical trolls. At first, people believed it to be the work of magic, but in fact it was mushrooms that could cause subtle changes to those who stepped into a ring of them. And now the changeling mushrooms are quite rare to find after being eradicated. Laos says that the griffin they face exhibited signs of actually being a hippogriff, choosing to test the theory as Laos places a slab of griffin meat into a circle of changeling mushrooms only to watch the meat revert back into hippogriff flesh. Now stewing the hippogriff meat, Senshi once again is tasked with testing his suspicions, slowly tasting the meal only to begin to break down. As tears stream down Senshi's beard, he confirms that it was not his friends that he had to eat that day, declaring that he'll repay Laos and his party's kindness by helping the gang rescue Fallon and slay the mad magician. Funnily enough, the gang accidentally step onto the changeling mushrooms, all collapsing later that night as they all feel queasy all of a sudden. Forcing himself out of bed, Laos realizes his body has changed drastically, horrified to discover everyone has changed races, with Laos becoming a dwarf, Senshi becoming an elf, Marcel becoming a half-foot, Chilchuk becoming a tall man, and Izutsumi becoming a kobold. Seeing as they need to retrace their steps to revert back to their normal selves, the gang don each other's clothing, all heading through the ever-changing dungeon. Slowly, the gang get used to their new bodies, navigating through various traps, only to stumble onto the magic door, the deepest documented point in the dungeon. Laos notices some adventurers had set up outside the door, but it seems they may have teleported away before proceeding onwards. Laos says since the dungeon is ever-changing, he suggests they proceed, even with their bodies all messed up, all heading to inspect the door only for Marcel to point out there is magic flowing through it. Out of nowhere, Laos's blade, Kinsuk, begins to sprout tentacles, suddenly reaching towards the giant door only to begin opening it. Marcel cries that there is movement above the door, all watching as stone gargoyles appear, creatures that lock on a Chilchuk, seeing as he is quite big. Luckily, Marcel strikes down the gargoyles with her magic, but seeing as her new body is not used to using magic, she collapses from mana sickness. As for Izutsumi, she begins to drool, fired up by all the noise and smelling the blood nearby. But seeing as Laos and his dwarf body can't fight for too long, Laos orders for everyone to flee into the open door. With everyone exhausted and out of danger, they all pray that they can return to their original bodies at once. But seeing as they need a break, they light up the area, only to begin cooking. Choosing to craft dumplings, the gang munch on the steamy treats. But looking around the room, Marcel says the area must have been a defensive stronghold built by the dwarves. Apparently, the elves and dwarves both raced to see who could advance further, but eventually things came to a halt, and things may start back up if the elves try claiming the dungeon for themselves. Chilchuk demands Marcel do something before the elves start another war, seeing as Marcel's mother used to work at a court, but seeing Senshi acting so flamboyantly, the gang agree to revert back as soon as possible. Heading through the room, Marcel is seen tripping as she's not used to her tiny body, but as the gang rests for a bit, Chilchuk asks what everyone's ages are compared to how they look. Laos says he is 26 years old, But from Senchi's perspective, Laos' dwarven body is around 60. This makes sense since dwarves live around 2.5 times longer than tall mans, so their new bodies perfectly reflect their ages. But Chilchuck wonders how fast they'll age. Seeing Marcel zoning out, Chilchuck reminds Marcel that her new lifespan is 50 years of age, managing to scare her into listening. Chilchuck wonders why people don't just use the mushrooms to morph into the race they desire. Suspecting the mushrooms' effects won't last forever, plus there must be some sort of nasty side effect that comes with it. Laos reveals he had wanted to use the mushrooms to help Fallon, fearing that once they defeat Thistle, they'll need to eventually reintegrate Fallon back into society. Laos had been thinking of ways to make do with Fallon's half-human and half-dragon body. But that's when the mushrooms could hopefully morph Fallon's lower half into a more convenient monster type. But when Laos begins to ramble on the use cases for the magic mushroom, Marcel suddenly hears some noises nearby. Honing in on the noises, Marcel says it's the sounds of rocks being hit together, and seeing as it may be the gargoyles chasing after them, the gang prepare to flee. Fearing they won't escape in time, Laos says he'll tank whilst Chilchuck helps defend, all whilst ordering Azutsumi to sneak attack the creatures. As the gargoyles approach, Laos is forced to endure a headbutt from the stone creatures, accidentally knocking Marcel back as her helpless body spirals past the others, forcing Chilchuck to catch and stabilize her. Having picked up Laos' sword, one of the gargoyles toss it towards Marcel and Chilchuck, coincidentally landing between the duo, suddenly emitting a strange smoke. Luckily, the duo aren't hurt, but it seems Kensuk has taken on a different form, an effect of the changeling mushrooms. Marcel and Chilchuck realize it must have been due to them forming a circle with their arms. But at the same time, we see the gargoyles attacking the others only to escape into the air. Seeing as there is time, Marcel cries for the gang to form a circle with their arms, wanting to test her hypothesis and try transforming the gargoyles. Sadly, the gang begin to argue, accidentally breaking their circle, but this allows a gargoyle to swoop in whilst they're distracted. With everyone barely dodging, they notice the attacking gargoyle has got its claws stuck in a nearby drain, all rushing to encircle it with their hands connected. In mere seconds, the gargoyle transforms into a stone disc, intriguing Laos as the transformation happened instantly. But seeing as the second gargoyle is refusing to come anywhere near them, the gang wonder how they can attack it. With both Laos and Chilchuck testing Marcel's weight, the gang all unanimously hold hands, all rushing the creature only to swing Marcel into the air, managing to bait the gargoyle into flying through their circle. With the second gargoyle turning into a watering statue, Laos discovers that washing off the mushroom spores will actually revert them back to normal, a feature of changelings as they rely on their hosts to spread their spores and give birth to more changelings. As the gang wash up and prepare for a meal, we see Laos admiring Kensuk's newly transformed body, wondering if it will revert back if he cleans the spores from Kensuk. At the same time, we see Senshi deep frying the leftover dumplings, only to present them to Azutsumi, who clearly isn't too fond of them. Getting an idea, Senshi heads over to the stone disc, using the disc's mouth as a circle to morph the dumplings into a different form. But Azutsumi fears that eating the spores-covered dumpling will have side effects. Luckily, Senshi says they ate the hippogriff and they all seem fine, ultimately convincing everyone to try out the newly transformed dumplings. As the gang unravel the different types of dumplings before them, they head to bed, but in the middle of the night, they all awaken to see they've reverted back to their normal bodies. Senshi says their room is actually quite humid, but Marcel is more fixated on Laos's weirdly covered sword, demanding that Laos show them what Kensuk looks like. Seeing the mushroom-covered blade, the gang wash Kensuk off, only to venture deeper to uncover a strange structure. Stopping in front of a door, Senshi manages to open it with some knocking, believing the structure before them to be an automatic trolley. Entering the trolley, the gang are amazed by the build quality, but suddenly the trolley's door slams shut, beginning to move on its own. Senshi manages to uncover some instructions, carefully reading over them as the gang settle in and wait, but sadly Senshi reports that the instructions aren't that interesting. Seeing as the ride is quite calming, The gang agree to wait patiently, giving Senshi enough time to brew some tea, all whilst Laos draws up a magic circle. Senshi takes the chance to ask why Laos and Fallon became adventurers in the first place, seeing as Laos doesn't seem like the person to greed over gold. Laos reveals that he never liked his village, having never fit in, and when he joined the army, he eventually left, seeing as he didn't like it either. Traveling south, Laos took on odd jobs to survive, eventually visiting Fallon to check up on her boarding school adventures, but Fallon ended up joining Laos on his adventures, both managing to make it to their current island. The siblings then had to pick up gold peeling and various escort jobs to live, making a living only to recruit others along their journey, a life Senshi considers quite reckless. Senshi says Fallon could have had a better life if she stayed in her boarding school, but Laos said Fallon had an unfortunate upbringing, as the people in the village shunned her for her mastery over magic at a young age, and it wasn't until she met Marcel that Fallon spent most of her days alone and misunderstood. Hearing Laos and Fallon's sad lives, Marcel begins to shed tears, revealing that Fallon used to give Marcel strange objects all the time, something Laos says is Fallon's way of befriending someone. Senshi says he still believes Fallon can be saved, comparing her to bacon and eggs, and it's still possible to peel the eggs away from the bacon. Sadly, Izutsumi herself is more like an omelet, someone that can't be as easily saved. Senshi utters that the dragon's corpse was used to form Fallon's lower half, but it is still missing its original body since the gang dined on a portion of the dragon's flesh. So Senshi suspects that they can rid Fallon of the dragon's soul if they devour the parts of the dragon that make up Fallon's current body. Laos is surprised by Senshi's idea, hearing that Senshi is still against resurrecting the dead, but he is happy to help save Fallon, who is still alive. The gang fear that consuming a whole dragon will take way too long, but Senshi reminds Laos that he's built quite a few connections over the years. Starting from the orcs, then there are the Golden City immortal inhabitants, not to mention Shuro and Namori's party, plus Kabru's party could help as well. Laos admits they've got quite the army to assist with their plans, declaring that they'll need to first free the winged lion from the dungeon, then defeat Thistle the lunatic magician, only to finally serve up Fallon's dragon body to hopefully free her. At the same time, we see Shuro, Kabru, and Namori entering the dungeon, followed by the elves who seem to be partying up with them. But cutting to Fallon, we see her being scolded by Thistle for trying to eat a dungeon mushroom. The season ends with Laos thinking up different recipes for when they need to feast on Fallon's dragon body, all taking another break to whip up another meal as they continue their descent on the trolley cart, deeper into the dungeon's abyss.